بسم آب وابن وروح وقديس وحاد الله وشريره آمين.
Hello, everyone. We're doing our 4-part series conclusion, hopefully, of our series against Craig. If it goes past that, we'll probably finish it by 5th part for sure. But hopefully today's the last part. You guys saw the previous 3 parts. People who are new to this, basically Craig made a live stream about how we violate the canons and therefore our holy orders are void. We lack the priesthood. We lack valid apostolic succession. We lack a valid, a trace to the original communities that we claim to be a part of, Alexandria, Antioch, etc. That's the main ones we've been focusing on so far. And today we're going to continue that discussion. I think it's going to be more so on Jacob Bardaeus. We might talk about Ethiopia. Moss, do you know what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so we're going to start off covering the Paulite versus Jacobite schism. This is part of the Alexandrian Church's history that not a lot of people know about. So we'll cover that. We're also going to cover the Islamic and Persian conquests. Craig tries to claim we were the favorite and we wanted it and all that nonsense. And we'll also try and cover Orthodoxy in Nubia and Ethiopia. And then we'll see how much time we have left after that.
Sounds good. Okay, let's hop right into it. Let's not waste any time.
Not be appointed over one city. And the rank of patriarch may not be held by 2 persons simultaneously in one see. And if 2 are elected in one city, the appointment of the one who was elected first shall be ratified. Right? So the one elected first.
Sorry. Let's go 1.5.
First is the canonical patriarch in Ethiopian Orthodox canon law, but there already was a Chalcedonian patriarch. So they're violating their own canon law. Now, the interesting thing here is simultaneous election requires a re-election. And to rewind, and you can get more detail if you rewind the video, but this would invalidate Gaius and Theodosius, who were consecrated on the same day. There was no re-election.
We already debunked this.
Until a Chalcedonian was elected in 537. Right? So this shows you their own canons would invalidate, because remember, this was the Coptic normal canon before it became Ethiopian canon law. Say the same thing, and in fact create extreme canonical difficulties for even the bishops that are more legitimate for them. So this is interesting to say the least. Now, for what it's worth, John of Ephesus isn't so pig-headed to admit that like these sort of flim-flam, imposed royalist non-Chalcedonian patriarchs are great, because he admits that not having local approval for their election is unjust. And so even though he says that the other side that he disagreed with in Alexandria was wrong, he admits that it was kind of unjust what they did to them. Right? They were invalid, but it was still wrong what we did to them. He writes, Theodore, by birth a Syrian, was asked to consent to be made Pope of Alexandria. Paul of Antioch was physically present and subsequently gave it his approbation and received him and communicated with him. And as was said, they even addressed a synodical letter to one another as patriarchs respectively of Antioch and Alexandria. So
this is really bad, really bad. And before we cover the depths of the controversy, this quote alone is a prime example of Craig absolutely butchering a quote. So pay attention to the brackets here. So he says, Theodore, by birth a Syrian, was asked to consent to be made Pope of Alexandria. And simple, do you have the actual quote on a slide, perhaps?
Yes.
All right. Do you mind presenting?
1 second here. All right.
1 second. I removed Moss on accident. Here we go.
All right. So Craig's quote, Theodore, by birth a Syrian, was asked to consent to be made Pope of Alexandria. These are Craig's words. Now let's take a look at what John of Ephesus actually said. Theodore, by birth a Syrian, and to him they addressed themselves, begging him to yield himself up and consent to be made Pope of Alexandria. But he, on hearing the proposal, was terrified and refused and fled, even taking solemn oaths and condemning himself utterly should he consent. But they threatened him with excommunication if he persisted in his refusal, and so he was forced by violence against his will, weeping and lamenting, to consent to the request. Does that sound like asking You know what? Why is Craig omitting such this important detail? But it gets worse. Let's keep going. He says, Paul of Antioch was physically present. Okay? What does the actual quote say? Paul, as they affirmed on oath, not being near nor taking part in his ordination, because at present he was not absolved from his fault, nor admitted back into communion. I've never witnessed such butchering of a quote. He's completely changing the meaning. The original says Paul was not present. He's saying Paul was physically present. Switch back to the stream. I think now, because a lot of the viewers are going to be unsure of who's this Paul, who's this Theodore, what are we referring to? So Simple, do you mind giving us a little bit of background on this whole controversy and Craig's argument?
Simple, you there?
Simple's
Oh,
complicated.
sorry.
Simple.
My bad. My mic was fighting me. Okay. So to provide context, Paul the Black was excommunicated from the church for communing with the Chalcedonians in 571. He recanted and was received back by the Syrian bishops in 575. However, Paul's penance pertained to his admission to communion, not to his status as patriarch. So the reason why John of Ephesus is sympathetic to Paul the Black and the Paulites, seemingly not to his own party, is because John of Ephesus too partook of the communion of the Chalcedonians with Paul the Black, and he was a close associate of his. So Friend says that John of Ephesus and Paul of Antioch actually received communion publicly on 2 occasions in Sancta Sophia from the Patriarch John on the belief that Chalcedon was about to be denounced explicitly, only to recant immediately on discovering their error. So they only did it to basically in the sense that, okay, we're friends and we're just all going to condemn Chalcedon and everything's going to be all right. But then it kind of backfired on them and they figured out that, okay, well, now we know that we have to we reject it and we're taking back what we did. So for this reason, we must be careful relying solely on his description, Craig's description of the conflict, of whether or not Theodore was canonically deposed or if Peter was canonically consecrated, as he presented this from the perspective on his own, being in correspondence with Paul of Antioch and on the side of Paulites. To make this more difficult, there was a conflict between the 2 Orthodox sides to who agreed on doctrine. Thus, we cannot assess the correct side by theology alone like we can with Chalcedon. In spite of his partition, John of Ephesus tells us it was Satan who stirred up the priest Theodosius to invite Longinus to come and consecrate a patriarch because of the division it caused. They both started insulting each other. It says they both hurled wounding accusations against one another and divided the people, even though no doctrinal issue separated them. And then basically the summary is Longinus, this guy who's John of Ephesus was very upset about, the missionary bishop of the Nubians, invited 2 bishops, John of Mar Abba and George Atreia, to travel from Mesopotamia and consecrate a new patriarch for Alexandria in 575. They selected Theodore of Remenus, but the people of Alexandria rejected him and instead chose one Peter, an aged deacon, who had served the late Theodosius during his exile. So the Jacobites argued that the consecration of Theodore was in violation of several canons and laws, but either deposed him in absence, or did not even recognize the consecration as valid to begin with. Thus, no deposition was necessary.
Okay, sorry, we'll continue the rest later. Let's just see what. So that just to give some background on this whole controversy, right? So allegedly, or apparently, or seemingly, we have 2 different patriarchs at once. One Theodore of Remis, one Paul, one ordained by the Alexandrians, one ordained by Paul the Black and the Syriacs. But we'll continue after we see what else Craig has to say.
So, this is not the part that talks about it being unjust. We'll have to keep reading, but I'll just point out here that when they made these patriarchs, these fake patriarchs, they went and then wrote fake schismatic letters to one another, consecration letters. So they're trying to really fulfill the role of patriarch despite an election of 2 people, and then claiming it was legitimate. And this is where no local approval is unjust. So we could see that John of Ephesus writes, and when now all imagine that in accordance with the canons, they performed a great work for the union and establishment of the church of Syria and Alexandria. Because the bishop was made without the knowledge of the Alexandrians, a thing which justice forbade, it proved the ruin of them all and of the whole church of the East and of the Egyptians. All right, so we have that quote there. Now let's talk about Alexandria's non Chalcedonian episcopal crisis. Why, right? Why did they go make this parallel episcopate? In 542, he, Theodosius Alexandria, consecrated the redoubtable Jacob Ardai, who reconstituted the monophysite party in Syria and gave it some help in Egypt as well. Theodosius administered his patriarchate to some extent, but perhaps by agreement, did not consecrate bishops for Egypt. From Justinian's point of view, he was safer in Constantinople than leading the opposition at home. Egypt's non-Chalcedonian bishops all predated 536. So this is something important to point out. We're getting new bishops by the late 550s, 560s in Egypt in the 570s and 580s. But all the canonical ones were in 536.
Okay, we'll cover the rest of this later. Now, I think it's an appropriate time for us to cover the arguments for why for why Theodore's episcopacy is invalid. So, you wanna cover these arguments? Simple.
Complicated.
My mic is being complicated. Okay. Firstly, Paul had approved the mission to ordain Theodore, which was both interference into Alexandria's sphere of authority and a breach of his promise not to exercise his priestly office during his period of penance. Secondly, Canon 19 and Canon 4 of Nicaea were appealed to as violated in the ordination of Theodore. As a quick reminder, Canon 4 and 19 refer to the proper ordination of patriarchs. Of bishops. This is because Theodore is not ordained by a synod, and not one Egyptian bishop participated in his consecration, let alone the majority of bishops of the province, as the canons require. So it was just done ad hoc. An appeal was made to the precedents of the early church, as was demonstrated by the dispute between Dalmatius and Proclus over the bishopric of Cyzicus, which perfectly parallels the current situation. Demicus was elected by the city of Cyzicus according to canonical procedure after news arrived that Proclus was already ordained by Cyzicus of Constantinople and was on his way to Cyzicus. Dalmatius was the one who the people elected, and he ended up being the canonically recognized bishop of Cyzicus, evidenced by his attendance and recognition as bishop of Cyzicus at the Council of Ephesus, while Proclus went back to Constantinople and eventually became patriarch. Fourth argument, Canon 18 of Ankara is referenced, which states that if any who have been constituted bishops but have not been received by the parish which they have been designated shall invade other parishes and wrong the constituted bishops there, so stirring up seditions against them, let such persons be suspended from office and communion. This canon is coupled with appeals to the actions of Saint Dioscorus and Saint Severus. Not only do we use this canon as a justification for the rejection of Theodore, we also use it as a justification to reject the imperially installed Melkites, which Craig cannot review. So basically, not only is this a defense for what he's saying right now, during the time of Dioscorus and Severus, the people rejected the Melkite or the Chalcedonian appointed bishops, but then they invaded other parishes, other sees as well. So by this canon that they also hold to, they would also be condemned. So it's a double whammy. Yeah,
and I just want to spend a little bit more time covering this precedence in the early church, right? So Proclus of Constantinople, everybody knows him, of course. He was the patriarch. But before he was the patriarch of Constantinople, he was assigned the city of Cyzicus, and he was on his way to Cyzicus. But when the people heard that he was on his way to Cyzicus, they ordained another man, Sicinius of Constantinople. And Sicinius was the one who ended up being accepted and acknowledged as the true bishop of Cyzicus, despite Proclus being ordained earlier. And that's because the people rejected him. And, you know, in the Council of Ephesus, we see Sicinius being recognized as the bishop of Cyzicus. So this was regularized, right? So even though Theodore of Rhames was ordained to be the Patriarch of Alexandria by Paul the Black, who who we discussed earlier, he lost his patriarchacy because of his fall, his temporary fall into Chalcedonianism. Or not even Chalcedonianism, but because he took communion at a Chalcedonian church. So he ceased to become patriarch. Thus, he illegally or uncanonically assigned Theodore to the city of Alexandria. The people rejected him. They instead consecrated Peter the Fourth. And this is the precedence. This is the justification that we have. It happened earlier in the church, and it was accepted. And these canons, of course, that we listed show that any bishop who is not received by the parish, or any bishop that should invade other parishes and wrong the constituted bishops there, should be suspended from office and communion. Let's continue to listen what Craig has to say.
That were non-Chalcedonian. So clearly by the 570s, they were aging out. They were getting too old and dying. So to continue the article, the death of its prelates disorganized the Egyptian church, although the ministrations of Jacob Bardai and wandering Syrians saved its priesthood. So he credits, based on John of Ephesus, that Syrian bishops came in, and invalid bishops, by the way, because all the bishops Jacob Bardai made were null and void for the canonical reasons we stated, were what resurrected the non-Chalcedonian church in Egypt. Let's read John of Ephesus, the primary source. Only one bishop, a certain John, could be found that is in Egypt to consecrate him. That's the Patriarch of Alexandria. And even he was himself waiting his trial for some offense. So like John was, he had trouble, but at least he was a bishop. And when they knew not what to do next, two foreign bishops, right, in violation of the canons, arrived who had lately been consecrated, so they're even their new bishops, for the Church of Syria by the blessed Jacob. All right, so that's what the primary source states.
Okay, so here John of Ephesus is discussing the consecration of Peter the Fourth. And this is pretty funny because, like, first Craig tells us that the Egyptian bishops were elderly and they were dying by the 570s, which is true, right? Hence why we were in such a dire need of a patriarch and why the Egyptians could not find more than one Egyptian to consecrate Peter. But then he's going to accuse us of violating the canons for having only one Egyptian bishop consecrate Peter the Fourth. And this is like really stupid for a multitude of reasons. Number one, the Paulites, in contrast, consecrated Theodore with 0 Egyptian bishops. So one is therefore the majority and in accordance with the canons. Secondly, if there was only one bishop available in Egypt, then like what is Craig really expecting them to do? Consecrate bishops uncanonically, wait until everyone dies, and end the See of Alexandria, which cannot be restored according to his standard because bishops have to be ordained by ones of the same province. And lastly, every Melkite Alexandrian patriarch since the parallel was reestablished in the 6th century was consecrated in Constantinople by non-Egyptian bishops. So he's condemning once again, and this is a common trend, he's condemning his own fathers as uncanonical.
Now let's talk about Severian consolidation for Islam, right? So how did the Severians take over the Gay Knights? Let's get into the details because I think that helps show how did the Oriental Orthodox Church crystallize and become what it is today. Let's give a review of the different non-Chalcedonians in 581. This is important because people just think non-Chalcedonians since Dioscorus are Severians.
You know, before we cover the different non-Chalcedonians in 581, it's really interesting that Craig is just skipping over the Chalcedonian patriarchs of Alexandria. When was the last time we heard of Craig discussing one? Was it, who was it? Was Paul of Tanis? Did he even discuss Paul of Tanis? I don't know, but simple. Who was the Chalcedonian patriarch in 581? Right? Let's not let Craig get away with this. It's very important we cover what the Chalcedonians were doing during this time.
He didn't exist.
No, he existed, but he was terrible. His name was Apollinarius of Alexandria. Simple. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about Apollinarius.
It's very fitting.
Your mic, bro.
Bro, oh my gosh. Yeah. So there was a lot of conflict during this time. Sorry, let me find the section where it is. Yeah, so basically the havoc like that was caused during this church like was crazy. The example of like Saint. Sorry, 1 second here. I'm trying to find it.
No problem.
Yeah.
You got it?
Did he get kidnapped? And the microphone got snatched?
Sorry, Muzzy, could you do this one? I'm having a little bit of technical issues.
Okay,
here.
no problem. Okay, we'll,
Yeah.
we'll tell you guys a little bit about Apollinaris. So, just a quick reminder: the last one was Paul of Tenise, who was a terrible man, killed several Orthodox believers, and he was rejected by the laity. But let's continue. So, Apollinarius, he was from a military background, and he was still a layman at his uncanonical election. Eutychius, who was also a Chalcedonian patriarch, he tells us that when Apollinarius arrived in Alexandria, he assembled a congregation in the church, and there he threw off his military uniform to reveal himself the robes of a priest. This is another Chalcedonian patriarch telling us this. So this isn't coming from a biased source. So the man threw off his military uniform to show his patriarchal clothes. So he violently persecuted the Orthodox believers in Egypt, and he tells us that Apollinarius was pelted with stones at his first mass, showcasing his unpopularity. On the following Sunday, when he read aloud an imperial letter and threateningly demanded Chalcedonian confession, stones were again thrown at him, but the troops standing by began a bloodbath in the churches and in the streets. This is Eutychius of Alexandria, a Chalcedonian attesting to a bloodbath from their side. Buttrus ibn al-Rahib, he reported... Go ahead.
You said Eutyches was a Chalcedonian?
Yes.
So they have Eutyches and Apollinarius?
Yes. Yes, they do.
Yeah, and Eutychus of Alexandria was a major self-snitcher.
He's known as Ibn Batrik. That's Eutychius. But in Arabic. But anyways, from our side, we have Buttrus ibn al-Rahib.
Ibn al from their side? Ibn al what?
Batrik, like Patrick.
Okay.
Patrick. But from us, we have a historian, Buttrus ibn al-Rahib. He reported 200,000 Jacobite men, women, and children who were killed. However, this number may be an all-encompassing estimate of the death by the hands of the Melkite authorities. Grillmeyer, he says that among the people, there was indeed hardly a confession to Chalcedon to be found. And he's describing this time period under the rule of Apollinarius. So he describes a common characteristic held by all Melkite patriarchs in Alexandria. Number one, dependence on the emperor in all cases. Number two, connection with military power or from a military background. Number three, consecration in Constantinople by the Patriarch of Constantinople, excluding Alexandrian clergy, which of course contradicts Craig's claims of validity. And number four, a pacification in and around Alexandria achieved only by force and their influence limited to that area. But let's continue, right? You know, we did Craig's job for him. We covered the Chalcedonians during this time. Let's see what he has to say about the non-Chalcedonians here.
That's highly artificial. Dioscorus had nothing to do with Severus. He obviously lived before him. There were people in when Severus was fighting with Julian, we're fighting over Dioscorus' memory. And after the Gainites, there's all sorts of divisions among the non-Chalcedonians. In fact, I count 6 serious parties with parallel episcopacies. 1, the Gainites, which were Egyptian Julianists. They were the most popular for the reasons I already discussed. 2, the Paulites.
We already refuted this.
Syrian Severians under Paul of Antioch, right? And under them were Theodorites, which was their chosen Alexandrian patriarch. I don't think there were a lot of Theodorites, to be honest, but I believe most of the Antiochian Synod would have been Paulites after Jake Bardi died. Then
there's no evidence for this.
There were Peterites, which were the Alexandrian Severians against Theodore of Alexandria. You start tripping because all the names are the same. Then there are the Jacobites, which obviously under Jacob Bar died, but then he's dead in 581. So sort of like his spiritual successors. Syrian Severians with Jacob before death. Now, the Peterites ordained Jacobite patriarch of Antioch, who later broke communion to absorb the Paulites. And that's how the Paulites and the Jacobites then consolidate into a singular group. We must not forget the Canaanites, which were tritheists with bishops in Constantinople, Greece, and Rome, and the Athanasians, which were tritheists with the same parallel episcopacies. So we got 6 feuding parties that aren't minor, being active throughout the world. So how do we get just Oriental Orthodox today?
So I just want to say he's doing a terrible job. This is a terrible division of the various factions, if you want to call it that, during 581.
Yeah, I have a slide on this before we go over them.
Okay,
like we
go
can
ahead.
Just divide it.
He did a terrible job.
Yeah. If you want to
first
switch
of
to
all,
it, you can
yeah. Just the first thing is, claiming that the Gaianites were still a majority in the 580s. Of course, we demonstrated this was not the case. They fell. They became vastly unpopular by the 560s, and by the time of the 6th and 7th century, the Persian and Muslim conquest, they became virtually like they fell out of prominence, I should say. Is the screen, the slide is up? All right. So I've created a better a better list of factions, I should say. And the whole point of this is like this isn't really our quarrel with him. The whole point of this is to show that during this time in Alexandria, there was lots of theological controversy. But let's continue.
Can I put the video back up?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. And just very quickly, John of Ephesus, like when he's talking about this time period, he says, "So great was the corruption and confusion in the church of the believers by the instigation and to the delight of the devil." So this is an infamous time in history.
World. So how do we get?
But let's see how he interprets this.
Just Oriental Orthodox today. Let's talk about their origin of their episcopacies. Right now, make this bigger. The Gainites were canonical bishops who were Julianist.
I hope he says, when he's saying, how do we get to their origin today? I hope he says 1965.
He doesn't, unfortunately. Let's see. He says something pretty bad, but we'll see.
Who made a new uncanonical parallel synod. They, over time, as I discussed, died out, and their faith were absorbed by other anti-imperial churches. Then we have the Paulites. They were originated by Theodosius of Alexandria and the Jacobites in Syria. As we already discussed, we have the Peterites with 1 canonical bishop and 2 Jacobites of recent vintage.
So this is a lie. He says that there's only 1 canonical bishop in 581. So when Peter IV was ordained, and this is before 581, when Peter IV was ordained, his very first act was to consecrate a veritable Sanhedrin of 70 bishops, which put the Monophysite church in Egypt on a firm footing once more under an Egyptian patriarch. This is the year 576. So Craig, please get to your history right. Please. Let's continue.
Then we have the Jacobites originate with Jacob Baradai. Now, why are the Peterites and Jacobites red? Because they are the groups that are modern Oriental Orthodox, right? The rest aren't. So that's why I point this out when people say the majority of Oriental Orthodox it's like, well, the majority aren't the same Oriental Orthodox. They're these groups. They were a minority of a larger ocean of non Chalcedonians.
Yeah, this is stupid. So he's saying we're not, or the Oriental Orthodox were not the majority because there were more than 2 factions, because other groups existed. That immediately makes us minority. What? Like, what evidence does he have that all of these groups were, equal distribution, all the same size, and so 2 are highlighted in red and 5 are white, therefore we're the minority? Are you serious? Is this the argument you're bringing up?
But okay, there's that what you're saying, absolutely. But there's also like, even so, like during the time of Saint Ephraim, when he was in Nisibis, he was part of a faction that was called the Paulinians, and the other so-called Christian factions were more than Saint Ephraim's. So the Saint Ephraim's was in the right one. So what's the problem?
Yeah, that's definitely true as well. And again, like this all comes down to Craig's reliance on majority for being the only measure of truth. But anyway, these So he's going to continue talking about how. Let's let him
We have
make the rest of his case.
Theodorites, one uncanonical Egyptian, Longinus, consecrated by new Jacobites for a mission, perhaps. This is not the video for Longinus, but just worth pointing out. And 2 new Jacobites. Then we have Conanites, Conan leaving the canonical church, and Athanasians, the same with Athanasius, not obviously Athanasius of Alexandria. All right, so we have all different groups. The Conanites started with a bishop that's canonical, Athanasians did, but everyone else doesn't really. We have non-canonical bishops other than a few here or there. We have people with void holy orders. Not my word, canonically void holy orders. All right, and so we'll make that bigger. Now, the Syrians or Theodosians pick Theodore. Let's talk about this. Now, Longinus, Theodosius made him bishop of Nubia. John of Chalcis and George Urtia consecrated Theodore of Rhamnus, archimandrite of monastery in Scetis, as Pope of Alexandria with Paul of Antioch's support. Now, the Pope John of Ephesus, we have this. And this, in fact, happened to the wise clergy of Alexandria, for they were by no means men of inferior merit or without knowledge, had not the gall of anger agitated them, and wrath made them stumble in their Peterites' hasty and uncanonical proceeding. So, right, the Peterites in opposition to Theodore. When the synodal letter reached them, informing them that a bishop had been consecrated for them by those who were Orthodox, again, non Chalcedonian, like themselves, and members of their communion, because owing to the urgency of the times, it was done without their vote. Right, so they're arguing we had to essentially violate the canons to make this canonical bishop, which is really not that compelling, clearly. Now, some Egyptians then consecrate Peter. They took so violent a course as to seize upon and consecrate Peter as the second bishop, at the same time, really third bishop, because it's a Chalcedonian bishop, at the same time upon the same throne. Whether this was right, anyone may judge who considers that during the whole space of 10 years, which had elapsed since the death of the blessed Theodosius, they might have created, for themselves a bishop without dispute, whereas they waited until the news reached them of the appointment of Theodore, and then made an election in anger to be a cause of quarrel and dissension and schism in the church. For Peter, whom they elected, was immediately regarded by many as an adulterer, meaning second bishop is schismatic. And moreover, to quote John of Ephesus, to strengthen his position, they persuaded this second prelate Peter, thrust, contrary to church laws, the canonical order into another's throne, to consecrate no less, as was said, than 70 bishops. Though were a man, but seeking for labors to till his field, he would find it no easy matter to bring together at one time so many men fit for his purpose. So I want to make this clear. The Egyptian synod that the Coptic Orthodox have today was reconstituted with 70 new bishops uncanonically from an uncanonically appointed bishop. All right. So we have their whole church originates with void bishops, canonically speaking. God knows. I'm not going to judge the actual charism of individual. I'm just saying what the canons say and what other non-Chalcedonians admit the canons say and what modern non-Chalcedonian canon law says the canons say.
Okay, so again, like he's going back to discuss the initial conflict. We've already covered this, and we've already covered why John of Ephesus wrote in favor of the Paulites, because he was in correspondence with Paul the Black, even though Paul the Black lost his patriarchacy. And we've also covered the arguments as to why Theodore's consecration were uncanonical as opposed to Peter IV's. We covered 4 arguments. So Craig's not making any arguments of his own, right? He's just piggybacking off of John of Ephesus' narrative of the controversy and drawing conclusions that John of Ephesus would evidently disagree with himself, right? He's trying to say that John of Ephesus thinks the entire Alexandrian episcopacy is now invalid or whatever. But we have John of Ephesus's own words arguing otherwise, and this was after the two sides reunited. Simple, do you mind reading the grounds of reunion, in which John of Ephesus states of recognizing the episcopacies of the 70 ordinations?
Yeah, for sure. So the meeting, which with Tiberius' consent was convened by the illustrious Mondir, attended by the chief men of note on both sides, and also by the Alexandrian clergy, and his advice was that they should cease from their quarrels and put an end to trample out the evils by Satan among them. They all consented and unanimously promised that they would unite again, and it was settled that they should enter into a compromise, and that all points of difference which Satan had stirred up between them should be examined into and done away. And when everyone had agreed to this, a formal deed of union was drawn up, by which all schisms and quarrels were to cease. The archbishops, bishops, and clergy and monks of all monasteries, and the laity who were at variance were to receive one another, and with all one accord consent to be on peace. And hereupon prayers for union were offered up by the priests on both sides, and also by the Alexandrians, and the reconciliation was complete, and all praised God for driving away the evil one, and putting an end to wicked acts done at his instigation among them.
Let's continue.
All right. The Egyptian synod was reconstituted, right? They didn't make 70 people bishop for no reason. This implied very few, if any, like 1 or 2, remaining non-Chalcedonian bishops before the election. This was an arms race between the Jacobites versus was this an arms race to the Jacobites versus response to Chalcedonians? I want to pose this to you guys. Everyone thinks like they had to do this because the Chalcedonians are meanies, but I think you're starting to see now, following this video, the real impetus behind this was internecine violence among non-Chalcedonians in Egypt. It had nothing to do with the Chalcedonians. It was a
Yeah, this is stupid. So I just want to say this entire conflict occurred because the Egyptians waited 10 whole years to consecrate a patriarch for themselves after Pope Theodosius reposed. They waited 10 years. And so Paul the Black, of course, got impatient. The Longinus, the Nubian, or the bishop of the Nubians, right? So the whole issue was, there's a long time the Egyptians are without a bishop. Let's consecrate one for them. Why do you think that is? Were they lazy? Did they just forget that they needed a patriarch? Perhaps there was another reason. Simple, do you mind reading us the words of Iris Habib?
Yeah. When their 33rd pope died, the Copts bided their time and waited patiently for the opportune moment to elect his successor. The opportune moment for their new pope came to the Copts with the change of the prefects in the city of Alexandria.
So let me ask you guys this. Why would the Copts wait so long for the change of the prefects, so the change of an imperial order, in order to elect their patriarchs? Why? Why would they wait? Why would they wait for the change of who's in charge in the government? It's a long and scary word, and it starts with a P. Let's continue. It's such a joke.
fight between non-Chalcedonians. So they didn't do this because of persecution per se. The main motivator was
they didn't do it because of persecution. Oh, my bad.
Episcopal arms race so that they could have a say over the future of the non-Chalcedonian movement. So I find this very interesting. It was like kind of a breaking apart of the imperial court party of the non-Chalcedonians. They had no chance of making it back in Constantinople, maybe a John of Ephesus there, but they felt like they had no chance. And it starts falling apart at the seams, kind of like when everyone starts going crazy like Titanic when it's sinking. And this is what we see here. Now to continue, the court non-Chalcedonians love the canons. They'll cite them when it suits them. So like John of Ephesus and other Theodosian consecrates, vis-a-vis like the Jacobites, consider themselves the canonical non-Chalcedonian group. So they consider the Peterites uncanonical for having elected their patriarch apart from their fake patriarch of Antioch, Peter the Black. But in reality, the locality elects the patriarch and other patriarchs ratify, as we already covered. So really, it's an argument between two invalid people, but one invalid person is a little more legitimate in some respects than the other invalid person. But to the person that's valid, you're sort of like, what's going on here? So I could quote Stephen of Cyprus, that other autocephalous non-Chalcedonian church, a bishop canonically consecrated by the Orthodox command of Theodosius. He invokes the canons. He's also a Theodosian. We could see in John of Ephesus' history in book 1, he recognized canonicity of the Chalcedonian synods. And overall,
John of Ephesus recognized the canonicity of Chalcedonian synods? Really? Interesting. You guys know the citation? So in the citation that Craig is listing of John of Ephesus recognizing the canonicity of Chalcedonians, you know what he's doing? He's just listing their names. He's doing his job as a historian, because he is a historian, and listing the Melkite patriarchs of Antioch, Constantinople, and Alexandria. How does that mean he's recognizing their canonicity? Are we serious right now?
this shows a lack of introspection as to their own canonicity, that they're saying, you're not canonical, you're not canonical. They would affirm the canons when polemically useful, but not like, look, oh, this doesn't look good for us. But this happens every day. The courtesan, for example, looks down upon the streetwalker. The courtesan is more legitimate than the streetwalker, but to an actual legitimate wife, the courtesan is just as much as a you-know-what as the streetwalker is. But the fact that happens today...
What's he saying?
No, not courtesan, not the state.
Oh,
no.
oh, okay.
It's like high noble. I don't know. Just continue.
Surprises people act like this in the past. Now, let's talk about how Chalcedonianism crystallized and became a majority movement. And it was due to favoritism under Islam.
Yeah,
so
this one is ridiculous.
Favoritism under Islam. And let's begin with the Persians favoring the non-Chalcedonians. Now, if you're not aware, the Persians invaded the eastern part of the Eastern Roman Empire and devastated all the churches, but for obvious political reasons, hurt the Chalcedonians the most, right? They're the official people. The churches are officially there. So people ransacking the official people is really hurting them directly. Now, to quote a Coptic source, some Copts felt relief because alien patriarchs were no longer appointed by Byzantium to oppress their Egyptian church. All right, so now there's some relief that the official church isn't there anymore, at least among the sectarians. Like I said, the average person probably just wants to go to church and is afraid of the Persians, probably doesn't feel too invested, just like the modern Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian today in the official division. Now, the policy among Syrians, so
Yeah, I'm just gonna pause right here. Craig, you know nothing about how the average person would have felt. The average person loathed and feared the Chalcedonians for their continuous persecution, not only against the clergy, but the lay people as well. So we can cover a quote from the rise of the Monophysite movement. This is what the average person actually thought, and according to Friend. What the Persian era showed was that a foreign overlord was not necessarily a persecutor, but a Chalcedonian nearly always was. Additionally, deadly hate against everything Greek filled the Copts because of economic exploitation by Byzantium and the Chalcedonians' attempts at conversion. So we briefly touched on one of their saints a little earlier, if you guys remember him, Domitian of Melitene. So he was the emperor's nephew who seized churches in the 590s. But this wasn't his only act. Simple, you mind telling us what else he did?
Yeah, I'm down.
Very
Yeah,
quickly. This is a saint. They venerate this guy. Keep going.
yeah. So usually in the Chalcedonian Church, just real quick, most of their emperor saints during the time when we were still like the majority, when Oriental Orthodox were more than Chalcedonians, they would just slaughter us. So it was no wonder that they seemed like persecutors to us. For example, in this quote, it says he went to Edessa and summoned the monks of Eastern monasteries onto him. He cajoled them and threatened them to endorse the Council of Chalcedon and forced them to receive his communion. When they did not submit, but used harsh words against him, he ordered the soldiers to drag them to the ditch outside the sun gate and slaughter about 400 of them. He killed 400 monks.
It's like, do you think they asked for his intercessions? Let's continue. So this is additionally from the rise of the Monophysite movement. The wave of persecution left Emperor Maurice, and this was the emperor at this time, with the worst reputation throughout the East. And an earthquake that occurred in Antioch shortly after prompted John of Nicu to call it a punishment for the heresy of the emperor. Friend relates that this is an accurate reflection of the attitude of both the Copts and the Syrians towards the Persian and Arab conquests, regarding them as punishments for the wickedness of the Chalcedonian emperors. That's what the average person felt. I don't know why Craig is trying to say, oh, they don't care, whatever. They go to whatever church they go to. Such a joke. Let's continue, see what else he has to say.
Outside of Egypt was also similar. They had some level of official toleration. They even had a reunion synod with state allowance, which didn't occur under the Byzantines. So this shows some official recognition among the Persians, while they could even have elections for a bishop of Antioch among the Chalcedonians during this time. So there is an active persecution against the Chalcedonians, while there is some state protection afforded to the non-Chalcedonians under the Persians, just historical fact. To continue, according to Dionysius of Tamar, who's a non-Chalcedonian patriarch of Antioch, he wrote, when Khosroes, that's the Persian emperor, conquered Mesopotamia and expelled the Romans from it, he ordered at the same time the Chalcedonian bishops to be expelled from their churches and those churches to be given to the Jacobites.
Another insane butchering of a quote. Simple, you want to cover the full quote here? Yeah, go ahead.
So this source actually refutes Craig. The full quote is as follows. When Choros conquered Mesopotamia and expelled the Romans from it, he ordered at the same time the Chalcedonian bishops to be expelled from their churches, and those churches be given to the Jacobite, for they had possessed them since the time of Maurice, but for the last 10 years they had been ousted from them as a result of the persecution by Domitian of Melitene. So they had these churches, we had these churches, the non-Chalcedonians, and then they were taken by the Chalcedonians, and then the Persians returned them back to us. So how is this unfair? I don't really understand.
It's so convenient for him to omit that last section of the quote. How convenient, it's so dishonest, man.
Craig,
go ahead.
Craig, how can we respect you? How do we respect you when you do this kind of thing? And you want us to do things with you in the future, joint things, for me to go on and we could talk about. No, why? You had your chance to tell me to go on with you before you did this, before you spewed this garbage. I could have come on with you from the beginning and this would have all been unnecessary. But you're putting out false propaganda. How do you do that with a clear conscience? How? Go
I
ahead.
don't know. I also find it kind of hilarious. Craig's complaining about how the Persians confiscated Melkite churches and expelled their bishops. Have you seen what your own side have done when they held power? Right?
Slaughter doesn't. I mean, on this is a common thing in Egypt. They would return to us our churches that the Chalcedonians stole from us, and across all the Oriental Orthodox churches. And I mean, we're just gonna keep going in it. Let's just keep going.
All right. We could cover a little bit more on the Persians. So this is.
Sure.
Oh yeah, we'll
Yeah.
continue from friend here. He says when Khosrow invades. Khosrow, by the way, he's the head of the Persian Empire. So, and he was actually relatively tolerant towards Christians. So when Khosrow invaded Syria, the Monophysites were left in peace. Can we say the same about any one of those Chalcedonian emperors? Not really. So he continues, bishops who had found refuge in Egypt returned and were welcomed in their former sees. In the conquered territories, Chalcedon was practically eliminated as a political and religious force. Michael the Syrian, he writes of this period as one when the episcopal sees were everywhere directed by our bishops, and the memory of the Chalcedonians disappeared from the Euphrates to the Orient. The Lord made the iniquity of the Chalcedonians rebound on their own heads. What they had done with the intermediacy of the emperor of the Romans was repaid to them by the intermediacy of the Persians, the king of Assyria. Just like Craig said, those who live by the sword die by the sword. Right back at him. And this account is corroborated with a synodical letter that we have in 616 AD from Anastasius of Alexandria to Athanasius of Antioch, in which Athanasius gathered his flock at the reception of the letter. Go ahead.
What did you read just now? The king of Assyria. What? Where's that from?
This is from Michael the Syrian.
Can you read that again one more time?
One more time, no problem. The episcopal sees were everywhere directed by our bishops, and the memory of the Chalcedonians disappeared from the Euphrates to the Orient. The Lord made the iniquity of the Chalcedonians rebound on their own heads. What they had done with the intermediacy of the emperor of the Romans was repaid to them by the intermediacy of the Persians, the kings of Assyria.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Anyway, Michael the Syrian, the Chronicle. What's the source? Like, what's the location?
1025.
Thank you.
Okay, let's continue. So from the synodical letter in 616, Athanasius said, "Know that the world today rejoices in peace and love, because the Chalcedonian darkness has passed away." And in spite of the conquest of Syria to our benefit, right? Craig's trying to argue that we were favored and we favored them and we helped them. But friend makes this clear, this is not the case. There is no reason to believe that the Persian armies were aided actively by the Monophysites. These aren't my own words. These are the words of a historian. Additionally, the joy was short-lived. This is from the same source. Despite their tolerance of the Syrian Monophysites, and after 617, the restraint of the Jews, the Persian occupation of the Byzantine provinces was unpopular. Monophysites could not trust a ruler who had imposed a Persian historian as a bishop of Edessa. However, what occurred at the Persian conquest of Syria was in stark contrast to the conquest that occurred later in Egypt. And this is the reason why Craig does not mention Egypt at all here. He's trying to claim that we favored the Persians and the Persians favored us, but he's conveniently not mentioning what happened in Egypt.
Egypt is a slaughterhouse for the Chalcedonians.
Go ahead, Simple. Tell us what happened in Egypt.
Yeah, so basically, and I've made multiple videos on this. This was one of the very first things, because Jay Dyer calls us Muslims all the time. He says, "Oh, they help the Muslims."
This isn't this is before the Muslims, right? We're talking about the Persians here that Craig is trying to claim. But continue,
Yeah, I'm talking like fast forward a little
Oh
bit
yeah,
during
oh
the time
yeah.
of the Muslim invasions, because we'll get into that. But I wanted to mention really quick, why is it so bad for the Chalcedonians to always compare us to Muslims? Because they were the ones who let the Muslims into Egypt. They always say we did. How? The Egyptians had no imperial power, no standing army, no control at all. And the Chalcedonians were the ones, they had corrupt governors, corrupt whatever, and we'll get a little bit into this later, who let the Muslims into Egypt. So when you ask them who let the Muslims into Egypt, and you give them the sources, for example, like Eutychius of Alexandria that we mentioned a little bit earlier, he himself tells you he's Chalcedonian. He says, he snitches on himself. He says the evil governor El Muqawqas let the Muslims into Egypt. But again, like that was a little rant, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, El Muqawqas. I don't know if that's how you say the Caucasian. He's one of the Chalcedonian patriarchs of Alexandria. I believe, forgot his English name, but we'll cover him a lot. But just continue telling us about the Persian conquest of Egypt.
Yeah. So for the Persians, sorry, I got a little off track there, but
No
the
problem.
Anaton, which was a monastery complex composed of 600 Orthodox monasteries, and all the monks were slain by the sword, except a few of them who hid themselves and so were safe. And all that there was of money and furniture taken by plunder by the Persians, and they wrecked the monasteries which have remained in ruins to this day. The Salar, or the Persian ruler of Alexandria, commanded all young men in the city from the ages of 18 to 50 to go out and receive 12 denarii each. So all the young men of the city assembled, and their names were written down, and while they thought they would receive the gift that he had promised them. And when he knew that all of them had come out, and not one of them was left within the city, he commanded his troops to surround them and kill them all with the sword. And the number of those that were thus slaughtered was 80,000 men. And when Salar had done this, he marched away to Upper Egypt. Certain Persians who gave him information concerning the monks who lived on the mountains and caves, the number of whom was 700. When the Salar heard this report of them, he sent all of his troops, surrounded them, and when the sun arose, they entered and slew all of the monks with the sword, and not one of them remained. And this Salar was the cause of many trouble, because he knew not God. But the time is too short to recount his deeds. So when the patriarch Andronicus had accomplished 6 years in his patriarchal office, and has suffered from the nation of the Persians, and seen all his disasters which he encountered and patiently endured, and went to his rest and departed the Lord. This is from the history of the patriarchs on Andronicus. So does this sound like favoritism? Like, does this sound like they had liked us? They killed all of our monks. Like, I don't get it. What's the favoritism here? Where is it?
Yeah. And continue. We also have a similar situation in Upper Egypt from the life of Shenudi or Shenut. Can you read that for us as well?
Yeah, the Persians shall come down to Egypt and make great slaughter. They shall plunder their goods of the Egyptians and shall sell their children for gold. So fierce is their oppression and their iniquity. Great calamities shall they cause to Egypt. For they shall take the holy vessels from their churches and drink wine before the altar without fear. They shall dishonor women before their husbands. The evil and the suffering shall be very great, and of the remnant 1/3 shall perish in distress and affliction.
Does that sound like favoritism? I don't know, not to me. And Alan Butler, he's a historian on the Coptic people and on Egypt in general. This is what he says: that the Copts fell in with this arrangement may be admitted. It would have been mere folly to refuse. And this is referring to the acceptance of, or sorry, the welcoming of the Persians into Egypt. But it is quite another thing to say, as the fashion is with modern writers. So he's making it clear that some people make this claim, like our good brother Craig here, that the Persians were hailed as deliverers. Such a charge is not only groundless, it is a complete reversal of the truth. And evidence of this, further evidence of this, is corrected through Picentius, bishop of Kift. So he relates the Persian invasion into Upper Egypt in a pastoral letter to his diocese, where he said, "Because of our sins, God has abandoned us. He has delivered us to the nations without mercy." And he fled to the mountain before the Persians arrived at his town. Butler also says, the idea of seeking protection from the Persians by submission or of claiming friendship from them never entered the mind of the bishop, and his action is in ludicrous contrast with the theory that the Copts welcome the Persians. So there you go. That should be more than enough to show that there was absolutely no sort of favoritism under the Persians. In Egypt, they slaughtered us, they massacred us. In Syria, they returned what was rightfully ours to begin with, so there was relative tolerance there.
And then still ended up killing us anyway. Like,
yeah. Let's see. Now that we covered the Persian Empire, let's see what he says about the Muslims.
So we have from a non-Chalcedonian source him admitting these were Chalcedonian bishops in Chalcedonian churches. They were the ones kicked out, and then Jacobites were put in their place. This is not my opinion. This is the opinion of a non-Chalcedonian source of their.
It's crazy that he's doubling down on this.
yeah,
And this is just to remind everyone. These three dots right here completely refute the rest of the narrative that he's trying to paint with this quote.
All right, and that's what I want to point out: pointed versus expelled. All right, so people say, oh, the Chalcedonians appointed bishops that were foreign or whatever. I'm not going to say that's great. People went along with it ultimately. People go along with a lot of bad things. Not great. But here, if that's a persecution, what's expelling people and forcibly putting other people in their place? Well, that's clearly more persecution-y. One's a true persecution. The other is just state strong-arming, I'd say.
could you skip a little bit? This is like...
And Chalcedonians start having a tendency to... Now, is persecution from the Persians against the Chalcedonians. That's fact, and that's admitted by a non-Chalcedonian source.
That's fact.
Now, Islam likewise establishes non-Chalcedonianism as the official Christianity. How do they do this? Because it's not like they wrote a law. I mean, some scholars, you kind of wonder, like they're looking for, like, they never wrote an official law that's non-Chalcedonian was official. They never wrote official law that the non-Chalcedonian laity are to be treated better than Chalcedonian laity. No, that's not how it works. How did it work? Let's talk about it. We know, of course, Heraclius, the Eastern Roman Emperor, reconquered his empire from the Persians, only to pretty much immediately lose it to the Muslims. The Muslim caliphate lasted for many years, and for over 130 years, officially recognized the non-Chalcedonians as the official church of Christians within their empire, and gave them rights over church buildings. And they didn't allow Chalcedonians to locally elect patriarchs and minister to temples till the 700s, right? So kind of like what the Persians did, which we just read from Dionysius Tel-Tamar, or however you pronounce his name. Now, the consolidation of Christians under non-Chalcedonians understandably commences, right? It's 130 years. It's more than anyone's lifetime. And you're having your local church is always a non-Chalcedonian. There's a certain point, like, if you had certain imperial sympathies, or like, oh, I'm not the schismatics, your children's 130 years later, you'd be pretty far removed from that to feel very invested in it. And so consolidation just organically commences due to that.
This is really bad. Again, so Craig's claiming that Islam established non-Chalcedonianism as the official Christianity. Does he cite any sources? No. He then claims that it's only at this point that consolidation commences.
No, Wikipedia, bro. Wikipedia. We're done.
We'll get there. Unfortunately, his own sources say otherwise. So we have Melkite sources that say Egypt was predominantly Orthodox prior to this. So let's begin with the start of the 7th century. Figures are hard to come by and are unreliable, but an estimate suggests that in circa 600, there were about 200,000 Greeks and between 5 and 6 million Copts. I'd actually argue this is an overestimation of the amount of Melkites in Egypt by this time. But whatever, it roughly translates to 3% of Egypt being Chalcedonian and 97% Orthodox. Additionally, the writer of the hagiography of John V the Merciful, which was a Chalcedonian, some people mistake him for a non-Chalcedonian, he stated that by 611, the Monophysites held all but 7 churches in Alexandria. And this is in spite of Chalcedonian rule, because 611 predates both the Persian and Muslim invasions. And this is, of course, in spite of earlier efforts by Emperor Phocas to successfully take the Church of Cosmas and Damian and all its dependencies and all that belonged to it and give it to the Chalcedonian Eulogius of Alexandria, which, of course, is a violation of canon law we discussed earlier. Additionally, from the rise of the Monophysite movement, by 620, the only patriarchs of Antioch and Alexandria were Monophysites, and their bishops controlled the cities as their monks dominated the countryside. Another like piece of evidence to show that as soon as they lost imperial power, their church completely diminished. And also the aforementioned John the Merciful that I discussed a little bit, he fled to Cyprus upon the Persian invasion, and he was succeeded by a Melkite George, who was of course never received by Egypt. We have from Alan Butler one more time. The successor of John in the Melkite chair was a man named George, but the Byzantine power had been rooted out of Egypt, and there is little to show that even the nominal appointment of George took place before 621. Still less can it be shown at what date George's appointment was made effective by residents in Alexandria. But this is the important part here. It is even questioned whether he ever set foot in the country. Neither from the Persians nor the Copts could he hope for any welcome, nor would his coming have served much purpose until the return of the Byzantine garrisons established again the church and the empire in Egypt. So just to remind everyone, Craig's claim was that consolidation occurred after the Islamic conquest. But once again, we're citing plenty that no, there was never any sort of Melkite acceptance, never. And we can compare this, of course, with Pope Benjamin's ascension to the Patriarch of Alexandria around the same time. Benjamin's election as Patriarch was a popular one. It cannot be denied that he won the love and veneration of his people and retained them unimpaired through all the vicissitudes of the most eventful primacy in the Coptic history. Once again, this is all corroborating the idea that the Melkites simply could not exist without imperial force. Chalcedonianism in Egypt was a foreign religion, that of the Greeks, which they attempted to impose upon the Copts. And another piece of evidence against this idea is the career of Cyrus the Caucasian. This is the Al-Mukakkis that we talked about a little bit earlier. He was a Melkite governor and fake Patriarch of Alexandria. And in describing the ascension of Cyrus to the throne, he says, friend says, for the people, not only had their own patriarch, referring to Benjamin, had been shunned, but he had been replaced by a foreigner. Let's continue.
But let me give some easy proof for people that aren't going to do all the super digging that Islam favored the non-Chalcedonians. Here we have on Wikipedia, but you'll find it on the patriarchal website, so they give their succession list. What their succession was during the time of the Caliphate's ascendancy. We see here in Wiki, Muslim conquest caused the Chalcedonian see of Alexandria to become vacant. Chalcedonian patriarchs of Alexandria after the Islamic conquest. After 727, the Byzantine Emperor Leo III once more attempted to install a Melkite patriarch in Alexandria with the consent of the Muslim authorities. The bishopric was, from that moment onwards, again headed by a patriarch. So there's no patriarchs at all for like 80 years in Alexandria, other than perhaps those living in Constantinople. There's no patriarchs at all. And as we can see, Theodore, Peter V, Peter VI, like we don't have years next though, because we don't even know where they were exactly. They're probably in Constantinople. We're in Alexandria. So clearly that's proof of persecution.
That's not proof of persecution. Yeah, sorry. That's literally just because they don't have any.
He says clearly proof. Or clearly,
I'll tell you,
fake. It's fake.
Yeah,
clearly
yes.
it's fake. You don't have patriarchs.
It's
don't have a
proof.
line. It's gone, Craig. It's either the Copts and the Syriacs are the continuity of those seas, or there is no more of those seas. Those are your options, nothing else. Or you can be a Uniate.
It's not proof of persecution. It's proof that his episcopacy could not survive without imperial means, without soldiers to enforce this false religion through persecution. The people won't subscribe. And despite, go ahead.
The Uniates and the Latins and the Assyrian Church of the East, they're all better than these guys. All of them. This is unbelievable.
Yeah,
I'm so shocked. I've been quiet this whole time. I'm so shocked. The more I watch it, the more I'm shocked from him.
It gets worse. Keep going.
Yeah, and sorry, well, I was in the middle of saying something. Yeah, so despite all of this, the Melkites continued to appoint fake patriarchs of Alexandria in violation of the canons, but they were all Greek foreigners, fled Egypt, and the rest of the Melkites who were in Egypt in the 7th century, they fled, and the Melkite religion fled with them. These are the fruits of Chalcedonianism, and the Islamic conquest of Egypt exposed it for what it is. It's a foreigner's religion that could not survive without imperial strong arming. Let's continue.
Here's Antioch, Athanasius, vacant for 30 years through the Persians. right? Not vacant for the Antiochian Syriac Orthodox, but vacant for the Chalcedonians. Then we have Macedonius. Then we don't know who, as we can see. It's a big question mark and big years missing in the middle because, again, that persecution. But how about the non-Chalcedonians? I'm going to make this really big.
Because of persecution or
Right,
because
very
it's fake? It's fake, right?
years.
Fake.
And consecutive.
You guys,
One
that
after the other, one
doesn't
after the
count
other.
as a patriarchy. You have a guy in Constantinople for generations just chilling there. That's a patriarch. That's not a patriarch. You can give him a title, like there's a Chaldean bishop. They give him the title. Here,
Titular. Is that the word?
He's in San Diego. He's in San Diego, where I am.
Yeah.
They give him the title. He's the bishop of what's the old name of Tunis? Carthage or something? I forgot. They give him he's the bishop of Tunis, yani. But he's in San Diego. It's just an honorary title. He's not really the bishop of Tunis. There's nobody in Tunis. There's no Chaldean Catholics in Tunis. But it's just an honorary title they give. So they're giving him the title, but he's staying in Constantinople. That's not a patriarch. There's a real patriarch there for the people.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's continue.
This is the most fun
They
part.
exist
Let him
during the
speak
Persians.
this
They
part.
exist during the Muslims. Same for the Egyptians. Same for the Arabs in Syria. So easy proof that the non-Chalcedonian side was given preferential treatment from the Muslims. It's not my opinion. It's pretty blatant.
It's not his opinion. It's fact, guys. Like
Yes.
again, are we serious, right? This Wikipedia warrior.
You know what?
Is-
You know what, you guys? I'm never gonna eat chicken McNuggets again.
No. How could you? No, I mean, I'll tell you. Let's be. Craig's favorite word is charitable, right? So let's be at least a little bit charitable. So without making baseless assumptions and assertions, what does this show, right? What does this emptiness of his lineage show? It shows that in Alexandria and in Antioch, or Egypt and Syria, or the East, however you want to say it, they were predominantly composed of Orthodox believers, thus were able to consecrate patriarchs for themselves through their bishops assigned to their numerous dioceses. It also shows that the Melkites very clearly did not have the same population, as Craig is going to egregiously claim later on. And many of their parallel episcopacies had effectively ceased. What do we think? Is this a result of persecution, or is it a result of no longer being able to persecute? Let's continue. Covering the final nail in the coffin for Craig, proof that the unpopularity of the Melkites were a result of the wickedness of their own actions and through their deeds. And the perfect example of this is the man we brought up a little bit earlier, Cyrus of Alexandria, or
Let me.
El-Muqawqis.
Do you mind if I go into this guy?
Go ahead. Go for it.
So El-Muqawqis, the Caucasian, as most people said, was an imposed Alexandrian patriarch. He's not even Alexandrian. He was Greek from the Chalcedonian, from the Chalcedonians in Egypt, and he was imposed on the Alexandrians in Egypt. So nobody liked him. All of the Miaphysites, all of the actual Copts, they hated him. Why? He would always persecute him. For example, we have a quote right here. It says, "This was the evil genius who not only wrecked the emperor's hopes of religious union in Egypt, but who, after making himself a name of terror and loathing to the Copts for 10 years, after stamping out to the best of his power the Coptic belief by persecution, made Coptic allegiance to Roman rule impossible. This was the tyrant who misgoverned the city and into the hate of the empire, the Roman Empire, and so prepared the way for the Arab conquest." Wow. "And the traitor who at the critical moment delivered it over by surrender of the enemy. This was the man of evil fame known as El-Muqawqis, the Caucasian." This is from the Arab conquest of Egypt. So these persecutions were a joint operation between Heraclius the emperor, right, a Chalcedonian, and Cyrus of Alexandria, or El-Muqawqis, and Pope Benjamin I, he was a non-Chalcedonian, a Miaphysite patriarch at the time. His own brother was killed by these persecutions. So we can tell you the story about this, but this is a trigger warning because this is not a good picture. Heraclius sees...
Sorry, very quickly. So it's very interesting that literally Every single Greek Melkite Alexandrian patriarch was responsible for the slaughter or massacre of Orthodox believers. Not one. I swear, not one was innocent of this. Except, actually, no. Let me take that back. The only one who was abdicated, and he went to Italy and retired. Every other Melkite patriarch was responsible for slaughter, massacre, and persecution. What does that say about the fruits of your church, Craig? What does that say? Continue. Read us the story.
So for those who just tuned in, once again, because I saw like what's going on, Craig claims that, and a lot of like Jay Dyer, Cleave to Antiquity, whatever, they're big voices. They always claim that we supported the Muslims into Egypt. The Copts, specifically the Coptic Orthodox, supported the Muslims into Egypt. This is completely false because every historian, majority of historians will say that it was the Greek Chalcedonians who let the Muslims into Egypt. So I'm going to give you an example of the persecution of El-Muqawqis, who was a Greek Chalcedonian patriarch imposed on Egypt. Heraclius seized the blessed Minos, brother of the father Benjamin, the patriarch, and brought great trials upon him, and caused lighted torches to be held to his sides until the fat of his body oozed forth and flowed upon the ground, and knocked out his teeth because he confessed the faith, and finally commanded that a sack should be filled with sand and the holy Minos placed upon it and drowned in the sea. For Heraclius the misbeliever had charged them, saying, if any one of them says that the council of Chalcedon is true, let them go, but drown in the sea those who say it is erroneous and false. Therefore they did as the prince bade him, cast Minos into the sea. They took the sack and conveyed him a distance of 7 bow shots from the land, and said to them, say that the council of Chalcedon is good and not otherwise, and we will release you. But Minos would not do so, and they did with him 3 times, and when he refused, they drowned him. Thus they were unable to vanquish this champion Minos, but he conquered them by his Christian patience. So does
sorry,
it sound like Christian?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand.
I just want to say something. Imagine having a torch, a fire, a flame held to your side until the fat on your body is oozing out. I'm sorry to put that graphic photo in your head, but this is the tools, this is the type of persecution employed by the Chalcedonians. Can you believe that? What does that say about your church? Again, this is just one man. This is just Cyrus. What about the other Alexandrian fake patriarchs? Continue. We also have another contemporary who narrates the persecutions under Cyrus.
So in the life of Samuel of Calamun, a contemporary, he showcases the persecutions of Cyrus. Cyrus of Alexandria, Chalcedonian, by the way, super Christian. This story tells how Cyrus, on coming to the monastery, found it deserted except for the steward, who was scourged or whipped and questioned. The steward said, Samuel the ascetic held much discourse with the monks, calling you a blasphemer, a Chalcedonian Jew, an atheist, and a man unworthy to celebrate the liturgy, unworthy of all communion. And the monks, hearing this, fled before your visit. At these words, Cyrus fell in a furious passion. He cursed the steward, the monastery, the monks, and departed. He came into the city of Fayum, cherishing wrath in his heart. There he summoned his minions and ordered them to bring the holy Abba Samuel, his hands tied behind his back and an iron collar around his neck, pushing him on like a thief. So they came into the convent where he abode and took him. When Cyrus took him, he ordered the soldiers to smite him till his blood ran like water. Then he said, Samuel, you wicked ascetic, who is he that made you abbot of the monastery and made you teach the monks to curse me in my faith? Holy Abba Samuel answered, it is good to obey God and his holy archbishop, Benjamin, rather than to obey you and your devilish doctrine, O son of Satan, Antichrist. Cyrus bade the soldiers to smite him on the mouth, saying, I will teach you what it is to speak evil of dignities, since you render me not the honor which is my due as archbishop and my due as controller of the revenues of the land of Egypt. Samuel replied, Satan was also controller, having angels under him. But his pride and his unbelief estrange him from the glory of God. So with you also, O Chalcedonian deceiver, your faith is defiled, and you are more accursed than the devil and his angels. On hearing this, Cyrus was filled with fury against the saint and signed the soldiers to strike him dead.
Yeah, and again, you know, these types of persecutions are corroborated by scholars as well. I'm going to read a quote from, again, an amazing book, The Arab Conquest of Egypt. Stripes, torture, imprisonment, and death were the portion of those who resisted Cyrus and refused to abandon their belief. Melkite bishops were appointed to every city in Egypt up to Aswan, while the Coptic clergy were put to death or scattered abroad in various hiding places. From the same source, as usual, persecution strengthened in those who were strong enough to resist it. The form of belief it was meant to crush. The Coptic church was smitten and torn asunder, but it never yielded. The great majority of the people stood fast and staunch in their faith. And this is, of course, contra the claim that, what did he say? That they were consolidated or something under
Yeah.
Islam? What a bunch of nonsense. Let's continue.
Now let's address, did the non-Chalcedonians help the Muslims? Short answer is no. The longer answer is it's more complicated. They did not
More
help defend against
complicated.
the Muslim onslaught, is the main thing. To quote Costantiniac, during the Muslim conquest, remembering the Byzantine persecution, the Copts did not engage on the side of the Greeks. Perhaps this was the will of the monophysical hierarchy of Egypt. Ibn Abd al-Hakam states in his The Conquest of Egypt in North Africa and Andalusia that the Coptic bishop of Alexandria encouraged the Egyptian Christians to be passive towards the Arab conquest of Egypt. Now, I know what people are going to say. They're going to say that we can't trust the Muslim source, but I want you to consider something because we got to work with
I never said that.
the sources we have. This is a positive estimation by a Muslim writer. He's not trying to libel the non-Chalcedonians. He's actually trying to say, look how good they are because they didn't fight against us. So this implies a favorable presentation of history, not some sort of slander.
Okay, so this is more nonsense. Yes, the Copts were passive against the Arabs in their initial conquest, but Craig, we were also passive against the Persians, and more importantly, we were passive against the Byzantines, even in the reoccupation, right? So even after we were persecuted by them, and then the Persians came, and then the Byzantines came again, we were passive, despite all the heinous acts and persecution of the Copts under the Byzantines.
I have a quick thing to relay that during this time, when the Muslims were like giving us our churches back and all of this stuff, they were persecuting the Chalcedonians and stuff like this. They were persecuting us, but they also persecuted the Chalcedonians a lot. We would pray for the Chalcedonians, like we would pray for them, like out of sorrow, like that they were getting persecuted. But like it's not like we had any authority. Like, what are we gonna do? Say no, stop persecuting them. We don't want your churches, and then get massacred. I don't understand what he expects us to do when they were the ones who let the Muslims in the first place. Like, I don't really understand. But anyway,
I on that topic, I don't remember who in particular, but there was a Pope of Alexandria during this time period who, when the Melkites could not afford the tax, he stepped in and paid their portion. I don't remember which Pope this is, but it goes to show the charity employed by the Orthodox to their persecutors. And Butler, like the Copts were a passive people when it came to occupation of Egypt, but like passiveness is not the same as affection, like Craig is trying to claim or trying to imply. This is what Butler says: national independence they had never known, and such an ideal can scarcely have entered into their dreams. But for religious independence, they had struggled and fought incessantly, ever since the Council of Chalcedon. That ideal they cherished at all times in their hearts, and for it they were prepared to sacrifice all else whatsoever. And additionally, on their view of the Arab conquest, to their honor be it said, there is not the slightest reason to think that they looked upon it with sympathy. Yet when they heard that even the Muslims granted a measure of toleration to the Christians, the thought may have risen in their hearts that subjugation to the Muslims would make life less unbearable, that the yoke of Muhammad would be lighter than the yoke of the most Christian emperor Heraclius. And just to remind you guys, Heraclius was the one persecuting with Cyrus. That they abhorred the religion of Islam is proved by every page of their history. But during those 10 years of hopeless misery, The sword of Cyrus had cut through almost the last thread which bound their allegiance to the Roman Empire, and they regarded the advent of the Muslims as a plague sent by divine vengeance upon their persecutors. Let's continue.
Now, we have this, an article on the Oriental Orthodox website, Caliphate favoring the Non Chalcedonians. Pope Benjamin I, the Non Chalcedonian Patriarch, the Severian, was still in hiding and had to be recalled by Amr, a caliphate-like ruler, who promised him safety and fearlessness. Impressed with his dignity as a man of God, Amr authorized him to freely administer the affairs of his church and people. Freely administer. Did the Chalcedonians get to freely administer? Although Christians were now counted as dhimis, subject but protected people, they had to pay taxes. It's a kind of persecution by the Muslims. By comparison with the last years of Byzantine rule, this was a time of peace and safety.
Notice how he's reading that with a little bit of sarcasm. By comparison with the last year of Byzantine rule, this was a time of peace and safety. Why don't you cover that little part, Craig? Why are you glossing over that? Does it not serve your agenda?
To further information about the Caliphate favoring the Non-Chalcedonians, the Melkite Patriarchate of Alexandria became extremely weak after the conquest when the Copts took over many of the Melkite churches. Right, just like the Persians did in the Antiochian jurisdiction, what happened to the Syriac Orthodox and the Antiochian Orthodox. The relationship between the Melkites and the Syrian Egyptian monophysites was difficult because the Arabs favored the churches which were not linked with Byzantium. Again, the Arabs favored the churches which were not linked with Byzantium. I don't think this is a biased scholarly take here, based on what we've.
It is. So Craig this is a Catholic priest who he's citing. It is a biased scholarly take. So he's citing this Catholic priest to attempt and give credibility to his claims that we took over Melkite churches. However, there are a few things to consider, as Simple hinted upon. These were our churches to begin with, right? Mm-hmm. And he quoted Dionysius of Telmar, who said this, but he, conveniently omitted that last part. So we've already covered the. Go ahead, Subdeacon.
You can finish the point.
Okay. Yeah. So we've already covered the numerous instances of the the confiscation of our churches since Chalcedon, but I'll quickly summarize. Number one, immediately following the council, the Caesareum, which was the main church in Alexandria, as well as a majority of other churches in Alexandria, were seized by the orders of Marcion with Proterius and his soldiers. Number two, Paul of Tabenese, he obtained an order from Justinian to close all Monophysite churches and reserve them for the Melkites. Number three, Apollinarius, shortly after he seized the remaining Orthodox churches of Alexandria under Justinian, and he was dressed in a military uniform. And number four, Cyrus, of course, confiscated churches in all of Egypt, persecuted their clergy, and put them in the hands of the Chalcedonians. In Antioch, same thing happened. Paul the Jew, Ephraim, Domitius of Melitene, they were all responsible for the expulsion and persecution of Orthodox believers and clergy, leading to the occupation of their churches. And additionally, I just want to make a quick comment on this priest that he's quoting. He repeatedly shows bias against us. So in the work Craig cited, this is how our belief is described. Very quickly. The name of the work is The Melkite Church in the Islamic World. A substantial part of the Christians of the Antiochian Patriarchate, following the example of Alexandria, adopted Monophysitism, which is nowadays considered the final product of the Alexandrian school. According to them, Christ as God has two natures, divine and human, but does not exist in two natures because divine nature has completely absorbed human beings. This is the 21st century, by the way. Like, if he was merely describing Eutychianism, okay, whatever, we have no issue. But he argues this is the belief we hold to this day. And throughout this book, he continuously refers to us as Monophysites, heretics, whatever. So he's without excuse. Thirdly, even the scholar that he's citing suggests otherwise. He says, the fast reorganization of the Coptic Church after the Arab conquest and the systematic decline of the Melkite Patriarch of Alexandria were not caused by the Arabs' preferential treatment of the Copts. And in his own words, very quickly, lastly, I'm going to let Subdeacon talk after. In fact, Muslim authorities also accepted the autonomies in the Coptic and Melkite jurisprudence because in the 7th century, the Arabs were not interested in the Melkite-Coptic theological dispute. They simply took it as a starting point, the existence of two Christian communities that were equally subject to Muslim law.
Okay. So I was going to say, when he's saying this thing about the Arabs favored us because they don't want a connection. They don't want the churches to have a connection with their enemy in Constantinople. The problem whenever we do these kinds of shows and like just in general, the back and forth that's been happening for years with these guys, and again, it's always them initiating. And I'm starting to think they initiate because they need to talk about us for them to have legitimacy, because then it gets us to compare. The thing that the truth is, in reality, there is no comparison. There is no comparison between us and them. We don't look anything alike at all. Our churches, our liturgies, nothing. The only thing we have in common is that they took our name and attached it to themselves. That's it. So they are imposters, but they don't look like us whatsoever. So there is nothing ancient or apostolic about them. They are the vestige of the empire that fell in 1453.
Yeah.
They're the vestige of that state. They're a state church. It's like the Anglicans. Like if the United Kingdom fell, then the Anglican church is still around. That's what they are. They're the same thing. So when we are the Orthodox Church, we are the Catholic Church, we have the native rights of these areas. We have the continuity of patriarchs of these areas. We have everything. You can go and see it in real life in person. For them, you can't. They all look the same. Romanian, Antiochian, Jerusalem, Greece, Russia, they all look the same. You can't tell the difference because they're all one thing. They're just the Byzantine Roman thing. That's what they are. We are the universal church, the ancient church. So for them to associate themselves with us, is to bring themselves up, to give themselves legitimacy. Otherwise, there's no comparison. So when he's saying this thing about the Arabs didn't want anything connected to Byzantium because that was their political enemy, that means nothing. That means nothing. The Arabs don't care about what church it is. If there's a political enemy, they care more about that. So what we're arguing here is legitimacy and continuity of orders. That's the argument of these shows. For you to bring that up, like if it's some kind of negative somewhere, it just shows that you are a political church. You are a church of the state. That's all it shows. That in order for you to function, you need the state. So this is why until now you guys still have the double-headed eagles. You guys are still waiting for Constantinople to come back. It's very worldly. It's almost like them. It's almost like the Muslims, Dinu Dawla. They need the caliphate back. You need the empire back to function. So we don't, because we were functioning before the empire was Christian. We were already there. It's irrelevant to us what the religion is or what the state is of the empire.
That's very well said, Subdeacon.
Yeah, and I just want to say evidence of this, and Subdeacon, I'm sure you can attest to this, is the Rum in Syria. What do they identify as? The Rum, the East, the Malkite.
Yeah.
What do they claim to be?
Romans.
They claim to be Romans. That's what Rome means. They claim to be Greeks. They claim to be Romans. It's and even in nature of their accusations against us, they call us a brown cult or whatever because nationalism is rooted in the identity of their church.
Right. Yeah, I mean, none of their patriarchs have any setting in their actual place. Like, for example, the Coptic so-called Chalcedonian patriarch to this day, Greek. Like, what it is not the patriarch there supposed to instill a certain sort of confidence? The people themselves are supposed to elect them and like them. This is the whole issue. All of these patriarchs aren't just like, okay, like we're gathering the people, we're trying to be a piece of love and unity. It's like you either get on our way or the highway, and then you will kill you and persecute you. And when I was reading some of these quotes, it reminds me in the Synaxarium pre-schism, some of these holy martyrs, the things that the pagan emperors would do to them, tear out their nails, drag them around the cities, the same thing the Chalcedonians repeated to us later on. And you can't find a case where we did this to them. It's just not possible. So yeah, like I don't know if you want to keep going or say anything
Yeah.
else, but
I think we can continue.
Learned so far. We know that Amir Umar ibn Sa'd al-Ansari allowed for safety in public defense of the Christian faith from John III of Antioch, as preserved in a primary source disputation of John and the Emir. And Michael the Syrian wrote with satisfaction that the memory of Chalcedon was erased from the Euphrates to the east. So we have a non-Chalcedonian source writing that, yeah, we're happy that Chalcedon was being pretty much persecuted against by the caliphate.
It's so ironic. I brought this quote up earlier, and I quoted it in full. He's talking about the Persians. Michael the Syrian was talking about the Persians here. So yet another extremely embarrassing blunder by Craig, claiming that this is in reference to the caliphates.
So that's
Yep.
their own sources saying this. So having already discussed how the Egyptian and Syrian
Deacon.
Orthodox churches have invalid
Are you
holy orders,
here?
we never covered the Armenians, but the Armenians
Deacon
are a
needs to
national
wake up,
schism.
bro.
They would have not
Will,
originated with
I'm here, I'm here.
meaning outside.
Before, hold on. We'll cover the Nubians. He's gonna cover the Nubians and then right into Ethiopia.
All right.
This, by the way, one of the most embarrassing parts in the entire, not even embarrassing, one of the most dishonest parts will continue. We'll see.
Out of their jurisdiction. So they would at least have, there'd be the schismatics with holy orders. How about the Ethiopians? Do they have holy orders? Do they have a canonical synod? Let's get into the nitty gritty. Was there collateral damage in Ethiopia from the non-canonical programs in Egypt? Well, in a map in Friend's the Monophysite controversy, you could see Makura in southern Egypt was Chalcedonian 700, Alwan, Sudan was Chalcedonian 580. So we have some reason to believe that even if there were a lot of not Chalcedonians kicking around, there would have been also Chalcedonians kicking around that could have been sending clergy to Ethiopia.
Because this is really, really, really bad. Simple. Do you have the map that he's referring to?
I do. I do.
Okay. So
Agen?
while you put that up, I just want to go over some of these smaller claims. He's claiming that southern Egypt and Sudan were Chalcedonian up until the 8th and mid 6th century, respectively. So not only is this absolutely false, it's also grossly perverting Friend's own words, which he'll show. But first, it's geographically incorrect, historically incorrect, and an oversimplification. Is the map up? Sorry. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, the map's up.
So,
map's up.
Makuria was one of 3 kingdoms of Nubia in Sudan, alongside Nobatia and Elwa. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Before its annexation of Nobatia in the 700s, Makuria was entirely south of Egypt, and Nobatia and Elwa were both converted to Orthodoxy, as recorded by John of Ephesus, prior to Chalcedonian missionary arrival. And before we get into the history, I really want to cover Craig's massive blunder. It can't go unnoticed. We can't let him get away with it. So Friend's map, or first, he's claiming that Makuria was Chalcedonian to 780, right? That's what Craig is saying. But Friend's map says that Makuria was Chalcedonian until 700 AD, and that Alwa was Monophysite from 580. Not that it was Chalcedonian until 580, as Craig wrote. You guys want to know why? This is because Alwa converted to Christianity in 580. How could they be Chalcedonian until 580 if they converted in 580? So dishonest. He's claiming
crazy.
that this kingdom, which was Monophysite in its entire history, which was converted in 580, was previously Chalcedonian, and he's twisting the words of the map. How dishonest.
Yeah. Do you mind if I cover some of the?
Yeah, go ahead.
So on this
Bad
map, so
quality,
let's.
but-
Yeah,
Go
it's not the greatest of quality, but it's something. So the brown map on the left, and I even threw in the maps of Armenia for our Armenian lovers, because Armenia was massive, by the way.
Brown cult.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. So the brown cult map on the left, so you can see there Rakoti and then Alexandria, because they're 2 different things. But under them, you can see that Axum and Ethiopia, they're shaded, like you see the lines. So of the 3 kingdoms, Nobatia, the northern kingdom, was the first to convert to Christianity in 543 in its anti-Chalcedonian form. And then Alwa, the southern kingdom, was converted by Bishop Longinus, which we mentioned a little bit ago briefly. His missions occurred between 569 and 580, and to describe his success, the north and south of Nubia were won for Christianity in the anti-Chalcedonian mission. So what about Makuria, the Middle Empire? Makuria was initially converted by Chalcedonian missionaries. Okay, this is true. But Friend adds a nuance to this. He says how long Makuria remained Chalcedonian is not certain. Sometime between 560 and 710, the two Chalcedonians of Nobatia and Macuria united to form one realm, perhaps through the great Nobatian ruler Macarius, but by then Nubia was all monophysite. So very clearly here, we had the majority in all of those countries. Very clearly here, Egypt and Ethiopia were one. We even call Egypt back then, it was called the Pentapolis, the 5 cities. They were all under Egypt. Like, this is just so like ahistorical. It's crazy.
What do I want to say? Yes, so just one more time. I don't want to let this slip away so easily. One more time. Craig claimed that Alua was he claimed that the Middle Kingdom was Chalcedonian until 580, even though it was converted in 580. No, not Macuria. It's Nobatia or Alwa.
Oh,
No, it was
Nobatia,
Alwa.
It is Alwa.
See, we're confusing up the kingdom. Wait, one more time. He claimed that it was Chalcedonian until 580, despite the fact that it was converted in 580. So dishonest. And he cited this map. He read this map. He looked at this map, and he still said what he said. And yeah, we can spend a little bit of time just covering this map, refuting the brown cults. Like if you zoom in, I know it's low quality, but take a look at Anatolia. The entire south is shaded. The entire move your mouse up.
Oh, it's my bad.
Up.
Right here.
Yeah, there. The south isn't, the entire south is shaded. The kingdom of Cilicia, I don't know how to pronounce that. It's completely shaded. Armenia.
Silesia.
The east into the Persian Empire, completely shaded. If we zoom in into the Levant isn't shaded, but the countryside is shaded. The Arabian, the Ghassanid areas, the Arabian tribes are shaded, and then in the entire Egypt is shaded.
I have to give props to you, Masi, for being good at geography. For real.
Thank you.
I mean, it's easy when the map is literally right there.
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
You can mess up a lot of things. Like, respectfully to Craig, you can be incorrect on history. That's a lot of words, but the map is pretty clear. I don't understand.
Yeah.
So
well, he's being dishonest. He didn't. I'm telling you. I'm sorry. I can't be charitable. I can't say this is an honest mistake. But take a look at Ethiopia, right? It's completely shaded as well, or the populated areas are all along the what's the Nile called? I don't know. Along the river where the people live in Ethiopia, that's completely shaded as well. And this is gonna come back to bite Craig in the future. Let's continue the video. Do you mind putting up the screen?
Can you switch back again?
There are in a pro-Oriental Orthodox book scholarly takes that Monroe Hay doesn't agree with, but so you're aware what other scholars believe about the origin and the canonical integrity of the Ethiopian church. Those scholars write, Ethiopians honored non-Monophysite prelates as saints, and that the Ascomite King Caleb was obedient to the Catholic patriarch set up by Justin Alexandria. Ethiopia apparently only would have of necessity adopted monophysitism, i.e. that's taking sides of the Oscars in his mind, after the establishment of the Muslim empire had cut off the Melkite succession. So his argument is that until Islam came invaded, they were Chalcedonians, at least officially, in Ethiopia. That's one scholarly take. Here's another.
Okay, I guess we'll wait until, or I can just cover this simple part until Deacon is here. So Craig's claiming that scholars are saying that Ethiopia was initially Chalcedonian. This quote-unquote scholar of Craig is a 17th century Portuguese Jesuit missionary to Ethiopia by the name of Baltazar Telles. And let's see the full words of this scholar and assess for ourselves. But notwithstanding that in the days of the wicked Dioscorus, who lived about the year 444, there were presently errors introduced into Ethiopia, which came from Alexandria. Yet as long as the Catholic party prevailed in Alexandria, which we find was till the year 610 or 620, when the holy men Eulogius and John the Almsgiver were patriarchs of Alexandria, we suppose that the greatest part of Ethiopia was subject to the See of Rome and always followed the doctrines of the teachers sent into it. Does that sound like the work of an academic scholar to you, or a polemicist? That you swoop so low to rely on a Portuguese Jesuit from the 1600s who claims that Ethiopia was always subject under Rome? Do you agree with that claim, Craig? It's bizarre and desperate. And this is why Craig cannot find any contemporary historian to cite for his claim. It's comedical that he dismisses Monroe Hay, who's one of the most authoritative and well-respected historians on Ethiopia, as just another pro-Oriental Orthodox scholar. Yet he cites this Jesuit polemicist as a reliable authority. But even then, this claim is refuted by Monroe Hay, who says there is no reliable indication that the Ethiopians adhere to the Catholic or Melkite belief after Chalcedon. We can continue the video.
No, do we want like
Deacon,
a deacon?
add anything to that?
I am here. I mean, I don't know how much, what to say when.
Say whenever you feel like it. You're the star of this section.
I mean, he has the Tekle Hymenot slide up, so you can just go like do whatever you want on that.
We can first start by tackling like the whole was Ethiopia Chalcedonian ever, and just look at like what the scholars have to say. So firstly, it's like pretty much uncontested by all scholarship that Ethiopia was non-Chalcedonian, because, and this is very important to clarify, as Alexandria goes, Ethiopia goes, right? Because we know that Ethiopia got her orders, her holy orders, from Saint Frumentius, who got his holy orders from Saint Athanasius the Apostolic. So we were, until the 1960s, led patriarchally by Alexandria. We were under Alexandria's supervision. Our bishops were sent to us from Alexandria. So here's a quote I can pull up here. Stephen J. Strauss, he has a writing called Perspectives on the Nature of Christ in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, a case study in contextualized theology. And he pretty much says this is in quotes verbatim. He says, quote, when the Alexandrian church rejected the Council of Chalcedon, Ethiopia stayed allied with her mother church in Egypt. So it's pretty straightforward right there. So Egypt rejects it. We find out because Egypt was representing us at the council. They explained to us the nature for why they rejected it. We accept it, so we continue with them. And the burden of proof is on Craig, pretty much, right? Yeah. To show us without a shadow of a doubt that Ethiopia turned Chalcedonian, because what you see is Alexandria, as we already know, was a bastion of non-Chalcedonianism, right? 99% of the people there were against Chalcedon, whereas Alexandria goes, Ethiopia goes. So that's one. That's the first thing that we need to point out. Second is with regards to Caleb of Aksum. And Saint Caleb, who was the emperor of Ethiopia in the early 500s, is a very, very sore spot for a lot of Chalcedonians because they venerate him. He's in their Synaxarium, right? They gave him a weird name called Elisbon, but you can search him up, Saint Elisbon of Ethiopia. It's Saint Caleb. He was the king of Ethiopia at the time, and he is known primarily for leading an expedition in Yemen where he freed a community of Christians that were in the southern Arabian Peninsula, specifically in a place called Nagran, Najran. So why is that so interesting? Well, the martyrs that were in Nagran, because they were under persecution by the Jewish ruler in that area, most scholarship also concedes were also non-Chalcedonian. So what you see is basically they have a sore spot for a non-Chalcedonian saint that they venerate, who went to Nagran to free a Christian community that was under persecution, filled with the martyrs, which, by the way, they also venerate. So, for instance, you can search up St. Arethyus, who they have in their Synaxarium. They venerate him as a saint. Even though, like I said, you can search it up. There's plenty of different scholarship that explain this. For instance, there's a great article called Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula by Marcus K. of Capers. And this is basically what he has to say. He talks about the Himyarites, who are the ones that were persecuting in the southern Arabian territory. He says, after crushing or wiping out Christian groups on the coast and in the capital Zafar, he began a more cautious persecution of the Christians in Nagran, the fertile valley north of Himyarite territory proper, where the Monophysite form was securely implanted amongst the indigenous population. There's another scholar called Trimmingham who says the exact same thing. Obviously, they say Monophysite. We know what that means. It means Monophysite means non-Chalcedonian. So St. Caleb is interacting with a non-Chalcedonian community, okay? What this puts Craig in a really awkward situation, because guess what? You venerate St. Arethyus, you venerate the martyrs of Nagran, who are Monophysites, and you venerate the guy that freed them, St. Caleb, who's also non-Chalcedonian. See? So that's another proof of Ethiopia being very much non-Chalcedonian. And then the other proof is St. Caleb's successor, immediate successor, who many believe was related to St. Caleb, might have been his son, is Emperor Gabra Masqal. Emperor Gavrimaskat is very, very key because he has a close association with a saint called Saint Yared the Aksumite, or Saint Jared, who is the leading hymnographer of the Ethiopian church. Now, you might be like, what does this have to do with anything? Well, Saint Yared has a particular veneration for a group of saints called the Nine Saints. This is very important. The Nine Saints were a group of Miaphysites who were under persecution by the Chalcedonians, some from Antioch, some from Constantinople, some from Rome, that all end up migrating to Ethiopia to find refuge. So this should throw a lot of question marks into your head. One, non-Chalcedonian saints being venerated by Saint Yared, that's one. Two, why are they going to Ethiopia for refuge? If Ethiopia is supposedly Chalcedonian, why are these non-Chalcedonians who are being persecuted go there to refuge, right? So the example I'll give is like, I don't know, if I'm being persecuted by Simple, why would I go to Agen for refuge? I know that Agen and Simple are friends, so why would I go to Agen for refuge? Doesn't make sense, right? So why are these nine Miaphysites that are undergoing persecution going to Ethiopia? Not only that, okay, these nine saints, upon going to Ethiopia, bring monasticism to Ethiopia. So prior to Ethiopia, you don't really have monasticism. They're the ones that end up bringing monasticism to Ethiopia. They're the ones that end up bringing what's called Tarafak Erlos, which is the Cyrilline corpus. So much of the Cyrilline literature that we have is given to us by the nine saints, and I'll bring up other scholars that talk about this. But the main point is everyone concedes that they were non-Chalcedonian, and then you have Saint Yared venerating them, writing hymns in their honor, and then Emperor Gavrimaskat is accepting Saint Yared, and not only is he accepting Saint Yared, he is devoting imperial funds and support into establishing monasteries in the name of these non-Chalcedonian nine saints. So you have an Ethiopian in the 6th century venerating monophysites, quote unquote. You have the emperor of Ethiopia making monasteries in the name of these nine saints. So for instance, there's a very famous monastery called the Garima Monastery, which is in the honor of Abba Garima, who was one of the nine saints. You might know of this monastery if you've ever heard of the Garima Gospels, one of the earliest illuminated Gospels in history. So these are all related to Abba Garima, who was a known non-Chalcedonian, a known Miaphysite, being venerated by Emperor Gavrimaskat, as well as by Saint Yared. So, and you can take a look at all of this from the scholarship. There's a writing by Philip Briggs called, I think it's called just Ethiopia. I think it's the name of the book. But you can take a look at that as well. There's another article writing that I would recommend. Donald Brake, he has a writing called A Historical Investigation of Monophysitism in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And he's actually quite, aggressive towards this. He definitely has a lot of different polemics, but he himself concedes that Ethiopia had always been non-Chalcedonian, and then even goes forward to say that the only reason why in the latter half of the first millennium you don't see a lot of things coming out of Ethiopia, like non-Chalcedonian literature, is because Ethiopia at that time was under internal attack. This is something a lot of people miss out on, right? So later on, maybe we can let Craig spout his nonsense, but he's going to go on to basically say Ethiopia is very quiet until the 1200s, where this Tekla guy comes who converts to Coptic Orthodoxy and becomes their first abuna, becomes their first bishop. You want to just let him talk, and then I can address that?
Yeah, we can watch the video and just pause when he brings up something that you want to address.
Sure.
And I'll make this
I want to add a
On a physical-
scholar. I want to add a scholar to what Deacon Mihrat said for the Miaphysite domination of Abyssinia and Najran and Yemen and Himyar and these areas. Dr. Sebastian Brock, in his book Holy Women of the Syrian Orient, he talks about this in detail. And he talks about Saint Harith, Arichas, you called him, and the rest of them, the Najran martyrs, all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
If I
we
can-
even see sorry, one extra thing is there's even like monuments, remains that we have of Miaphysite churches built by a combination of Ethiopians and Miaphysite Yemenis, Monophysite Yemenis, whatever you want to call them. Like the Al-Khalis church, you guys can look at that. It's very easy to look up. And like it's accepted it was a Miaphysite church built by a coalition of Ethiopians who were in the area because they had gone there to free the ones who were being persecuted, as well as the community there. Yeah, go ahead.
This is
Is it
a little off
restricted to Ethiopia?
topic. Sorry to interrupt, guys. People are asking, about the papacy video. If you guys noticed, I've been awfully silent. I've been working on the papacy video the past 2 hours. So if anyone was curious.
Bro has to mention it every video.
European Church primarily
I
believes
want to
that this
mention
relationship-
real quick too. St. Caleb of Axum is such a like damaging thing for them because it just simply doesn't make sense. Historically, after he's done, he retires to a non-Chalcedonian monastery. Like, why would you do that? Like, I literally don't understand. Okay, like I'm a Chalcedonian, I don't agree. I'm gonna go become a monk in one of their monasteries. It's ridiculous. But yeah, let's keep going.
With the Coptic Church. Ethiopian contact with the Monophysite Coptic Church remained minimal until 1270. The status of monastic Coptic abunas residing over the Ethiopian Church was never fully regularized for the time of Takal Haymanot in 1270. Takal Haymanot may be said to be the first Ethiopian to be converted to Coptic monophysitism, and thus became the main mediator of the Coptic alliance to the Ethiopian Church. Ironically, in his time, Takal Haymanot as an abuna, or meaning the patriarch of the Ethiopians. The last such indigenous prelate we hear of, which fact gives still more support to the belief that preceding him there indeed must have been native Ethiopian abunas. So my point of bringing this up is we sort of anachronistically think because into the 1960s, Egypt was sending the bishops to be metropolitan in Ethiopia, that the Ethiopians always had an Egyptian metropolitan. But in fact, we have historical evidence that this did not occur until 1270. And if this did not occur until 1270, they would have had a native synod until 1270. And if they had a native synod until 1270,
I just gotta let everyone know. I'm seeing it in the comments. Sorry for the interruption, guys. Just gotta let everyone know.
Okay, bro. Like, sorry, not every video, bro.
the Chalcedonian, non-Chalcedonian split, because they're evangelized since the 4th century. In that event, then they should have a canonical synod, even if there's some infusions of non-canonical bishops from the non-Chalcedonians. All right.
So I just want to pause right here,
Yeah.
and just briefly touch on some of these claims. So first of all, these claims are not Craig's. They're made by a Jew named Ephraim Isaac. And luckily for us, the refutation of those claims are made in the same work. So first of all, Isaac quotes the Forged Nicene Canons, which we talked about earlier, as the basis for the Ethiopian dependency on Alexandria, and then summarizes the known history of the Abunates, concentrating on the unfavorable aspects, but at the same time clearly illustrating that contact with Copts was hardly minimal, like Craig claims, from the time of Metropolitan Peter until 1270. And in contradiction to his claim, the very fact that all Abunas were sent from Monophysite Alexandria to be accepted in Ethiopia as heads of the Ethiopian Church is a sure indication that Alexandria had and retained the right, duly regularized to appoint them. And he's also claiming that Saint Tekla Haymanut was the first Ethiopian Abuna to be converted to Coptic Monophysitism. But we have evidence that prior to him, there were native Abunas, or that's what he's claiming. But if so, why did Ethiopia accept the long line of foreign Abunas that Isaac previously mentions, who arrived long before the time of Tekla Haymanut, and who kept on coming even in spite of their bad behavior? Right? There's no actual evidence for his suggestion that there were Ethiopian native Abunas, in contrast to the plentiful indications concerning the Alexandrian appointed Egyptian ones. Deacon, you want to add on to that or say anything?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things. Firstly, I want to mention again what Donald Brake says, right? He says that during the preceding centuries prior to the 1200s, which is when you see a lot of influx of non-Chalcedonian literature, there's a bit of silence in terms of writing being produced from Ethiopia. Why is that? Is it because Ethiopia quietly decided to become Chalcedonian? No. Donald Brake says, quote, let me pull up the quote. He says, quote, one would not expect a detailed theological debate in a period of struggle for religious existence. What he's referencing is in that point, there was persecution from Judith. Her name is Yodit Gudic. She was a Jewish princess, pretty much was like burning churches down and killing people, Orthodox Christians in Ethiopia. And then you have another guy called Muhammad the Left-Handed. And he was pretty much the Muslim version of that. And he was going around doing the same thing, pillaging, burning churches, killing priests and deacons and Orthodox Christians. So in the midst of all of that, Ethiopia is busy with internal affairs, doesn't have time to constantly produce literature so that, Craig can try and twist that literature and still find a way to say Ethiopia is Chalcedonian, right? So that's that for just initially. So then let's talk about the claim about Tekla Haymanut in terms of like the 1200s. There's a huge blunder here. Really, really huge blunder. And part of it is because they have a lack of understanding of the Ethiopian usage of Abuna. So we do use the word abuna as a reference to bishops, right? And that's how they're using it here. We have a long line of abunas, meaning bishops, which the Coptic Church would send to us. By the way, this idea of how come they didn't have synods, it's because they sent us one bishop at a time. All of Ethiopia at that time was one diocese. I don't know if Craig understands that. So you can't have a synod with one bishop, right? Ethiopia is one diocese under the purview of Alexandria, so we received one bishop at a time. That's one. Second, abuna does not necessarily mean a referent to a bishop. And this applies to Tekla Haymanot. So here's the huge blunder. To say Tekla Haymanot was a bishop is crazy because why? He was never a bishop. The Ethiopian church has never referenced him as a bishop. He was a monk. Started out as a monk, died as a monk. So to say that, oh, he was the first bishop of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is so hilarious because we don't claim him to be a bishop, right? So this is, I think, it's just a lack of understanding of the understanding of what Tekla Haymanot serves for us. We call him Abuna because Abuna literally means our father. And we call him this because of his spiritual rank and role in establishing monasteries. So he was a priest. Yes, he was a priest. He went, I believe he was a priest. But he was a monk, an abbot, who went around and established monasteries in the Ethiopian church, but never reached the rank of a bishop. So here, that's, I think, a huge blunder. That's one. Two, in terms of this idea of in the 1200s, he converts to Coptic monophysitism, and then the church officially now becomes Coptic. Like I said, we've had bishops since the time of St. Frumentius. All the scholars agree that Ethiopia was aligned with Alexandria since then. Moss already mentioned that the same guy that he's quoting literally says that we were receiving bishops from Egypt. You have other people that he himself was quoting, like Munro Hayes, that talks about how we were aligned with Alexandria. And then the other thing also is the only thing special that you see in the 1200s is that you now have political interactions between the emperor of Ethiopia at that time, his name was Ikuna Amlak, and some of the authorities in Egypt. And this isn't even a one-time thing. You see other emperors doing this. What do I mean in terms of by emperor interactions with authorities in Egypt? By that time, Egypt was under the Muslim Caliphate. So what you see, especially in the 1200s, is there begins to be letters exchanged between the Ethiopian emperor and the Muslim Caliphate, where Ethiopia pretty much says, we need a bishop. It's been a while. Send us a bishop. And usually what happens is the Caliphate will be blocking the Alexandrian church from sending a bishop. So what does the imperial, what do the emperors of Ethiopia do? They say, send us a bishop or we'll wage war. We'll block the Nile. We'll do something. And they threaten the Caliphate to basically acquiesce and then allow the Alexandrian church to send bishops. So that's the kind of interaction that we're seeing. Not that suddenly we've now decided to become Coptic. That's not what you're seeing. And that's exactly what you see with later emperors like Emperor Yaakov, Emperor Dawit, so on and so forth. And there's a great book called Church and State by a great historian called Taddese that talks about this. The other funny thing is the best way to basically gauge what Ethiopia was doing in the period when she couldn't produce literature is to examine what Ethiopia is saying the moment she can produce literature. So what we have in Ethiopia is the Renaissance period that occurs in the 14th, 15th century after the Dark Ages when she can't really write much literature. So I would recommend for people to look at what is Ethiopia saying in that immediate beginning when she can now start to disseminate literature. And it's very much anti-Chalcedonian, not just non-Chalcedonian. It's anti-Chalcedonian, okay? And what's so interesting is it's not just novel works that you're seeing being written in the beginning of the Ethiopian Renaissance. It's quoting literature that you see being brought into Ethiopia in the 5th and 6th century by the Nine Saints. So you remember a while back I talked about how the Nine Saints brought in the Cyrillian corpus, and I called Terafak Erlos. So you see the writers in the 14th century began to quote that exact same work. And that work itself has its own kind of extant version. So much so you have a historian called Joseph Lossell, who has a book called Elements, where he talks about how the Ethiopic Cyrillian corpus has translations that intentionally emphasize the unity of Christ, quote, over and against two natures. So that's the 5th and 6th century. So they're quoting that specific Ethiopic version, and they're expositing on it to show why Chalcedon is heretical. So you're seeing a direct link in terms of literature between 5th and 6th century Miaphysitism in the time of the Nine Saints and 14th and 15th century Miaphysitism in Ethiopia, once the Ethiopians began to start writing again after persecution. So I want to give you guys some examples of this. And I think a lot of this will make people laugh, but it's honestly just to show you that in terms of Miaphysitism, I would argue, especially around this time, Ethiopia is actually the most anti-Chalcedonian in her writings. So there's a compilation called Haymanot Abo, called The Faith of Our Fathers, which to this day we read during the Divine Liturgy. And there's some interesting excerpt that I decided to translate to read for all of us. Okay, so here's the first one. This one is a letter where our scholars describe what happened at Chalcedon. Okay, so supposedly, right, if this is after a long period of Ethiopia being Chalcedonian, you would see a very favorable rendition of what happened at Chalcedon, right? Let's take a look. Quote, the assembly of Jews who gathered at Chalcedon under the tome of the apostate Leo divided the one Christ into two natures, two hypostases, two forms, two workings, and two wills. So that's the first one. Okay, number two. But Leo the wolf and the killer of souls taught, saying that each nature does what is proper to it. The word does what belongs to it, and the flesh does what belongs to it. One does miracles, and the other suffers. Okay, that's the second excerpt. And here's the third one. Therefore, I anathematize Sabellius, Macedonius, Nestorius, Theodore, Paul of Samosata, the Council of Chalcedon, and the tome of the wicked Leo, who says there are two natures of Emmanuel after the ineffable union. I further anathematize Eutyches, who denied that the flesh of our Lord Jesus Christ is consubstantial with us and made the flesh consubstantial with the divinity of the Father. I anathematize anyone who opposed the 12 anathemas of our father Cyril and any of his writings. So does this sound Chalcedonian to you guys? I don't think it does. Okay, so that pretty much sums it up. The last thing I'm going to add here is Craig mentions a Portuguese historian. Moss already talked about how this person completely lacks credibility. He was like a Jesuit priest, right, Moss? What was the name of the guy?
Yeah, I can pull up his name. Just one second.
I think it's Baltasar Tellus.
He was
Baltasar Tellus?
Yes, that's it.
So I'm going to end by talking about Baltasar and the group he came with. Because the Portuguese, by the way, funny enough, came 3 times to Ethiopia to try and convert it to Chalcedonianism. Okay. And basically what happens is you have a group of Jesuit missionaries around the 16th century, 15th century. It's actually towards the 16th century. They are led by a man named Oviedo. Okay, he's a Portuguese guy named Oviedo, and Rome has sent him to become the Catholic patriarch of the Ethiopians. Okay, so they come in with their Jesuit monks, their Jesuit, proselytizers, along with troops. And they end up coming to Ethiopia to try and convince us to become a Chalcedonian. And he enters into a conflict with an emperor called Galaudius. Galaudius means Claudius, Emperor Claudius. He comes into conflict with Emperor Claudius, and Emperor Claudius ends up sending him an Orthodox confession of faith, which to this day is preserved, called the Confession of Claudius, where he confesses his belief in Tawahido. Tawahido means the union, that there are no longer two natures after the union, but one. He also, by the way, in that same Orthodox confession of faith, denounces Judaizing. So I know there's a lot of EOs nowadays that are trying to make the argument that we're Judaizers. The Confession of Claudius condemns it and explains that any Jewish practice that we have is preserved culturally and not as a matter of salvation. And then later on, they end up having a debate on Christology. So the Jesuits say, we want to debate on the natures of Christ. So Emperor Galaudius sends him 2 monks, sends him 2 simple monks to have a debate. The 2 monks end up winning the debate, so much so that Oviedo pretty much concedes. And so this is what Dr. Mabaracho Kiros, he's a great scholar from our church. He wrote a master's thesis on Ethiopian Christology. And he says this, quote, in the reign of Minas, the Jesuits tried to win converts by intensive debates, but they always faced opposition. So this is after Emperor Claudius. Meanwhile, King Minas forbade Oviedo to preach the Roman Catholic faith. Now, I want you guys to really listen to this last part. At this time, by the way, the Muslims were also entering conflict with some of the Ethiopian Orthodox in the country. So what do you think these Chalcedonians did? So they hear about the Muslim conflict with the Orthodox in Ethiopia. What do you think they did? He says, holding resentment, he, Oviedo, plotted the death of the king in collaboration with the Muslims. When the king was informed of the plot, he exiled him, and Oviedo died in 1577. So these guys were so much willing to try and make us fall into Chalcedonianism, they were willing to partner with the Muslims. So these are the Portuguese among whom Balthasar is one. That's the guy that Craig is citing. A guy whose group of proselytizers hated our Orthodox faith so much that they wanted to partner with the Muslims. So I'm going to rest my case with that.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Deacon.
let's continue the video.
So we'll continue with this 1400s Muslim scholar, take it with a grain of salt, because Al-Khashandi is very far after the fact, but he concurs with the sort of analysis given. He said,
Sorry.
the churches of the Melkites were taken over.
I think it's just funny how I mentioned that Oviedo was like consulting with the Muslims, and then when we play it, the next thing that Craig cites as a Muslim. But anyways, go ahead.
By the Jacobites, right? Taken over by the Jacobites. A patriarch was later appointed for the Melkites after they had been without a patriarch for 100 years. The supreme patriarchal power remained in the hands of the Jacobites. It was they who sent bishops to the districts, and since that time, the Nubians and those of Habasha and who lived beyond them became Jacobites. So this Muslim historian pretty much says that it was due to Islam that then the Ethiopians stopped having a patriarch, and due to that, then they became Jacobite. So that's another historical take. Now, what's my take on Ethiopia? I don't think it's very credible that Ethiopia didn't have a significant majority of native Ethiopian bishops in their synod. Ongoing evangelization, dare I say, more than they care to admit, because they like to say they were all Jews since like 1000 BC, and they all pretty much instantly became Christian, but they were evangelized over many centuries. You know, they grew more and more Christian over time. So this ongoing evangelization explains the reception of foreign clergy. They didn't have a ton of their own without major discernment of their non-Chalcedonian, origin. So, right. So I'm of the opinion they would have accepted a non-Chalcedonian if it suited at the moment, and they would have accepted a Chalcedonian if it suited them at the moment.
Can you pause this?
The 4th century.
Have you guys heard what he's saying in the past minute? In my opinion, I think. Does that sound like scholarship to you guys?
Absolutely not.
Craig's a scholar.
He's been doing it. He's been doing it for the last 10 hours.
But you want to know why, Deacon, he's saying this? Because he can't find anybody to back up his claims. He can't find anyone credible to cite or to reference. That's why he's relying on his view. And to be frank, we don't care about your view. You know, show us the sources, show us the facts. We don't care about your opinion.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we haven't been giving our opinion at all. Like, listen to all of our streams have been literally, okay, this is by friend, this is by this is by that. Like, I don't understand.
And I'm not sure if you guys caught on, but he said that the Ethiopians would have accepted a Chalcedonian if it suited them at the moment. I'm not sure if you guys heard that. One more time.
I heard that.
The Ethiopians would have accepted a Chalcedonian if it suited them. Like, he's really disrespecting an entire nation, calling them spineless. They don't. Are we serious?
Not just spineless. Basically, he's saying they don't really care about the truth of the gospel.
Yeah.
They're just opportunistic. And again, look, if there was evidence behind that, fine, we can take it seriously. But the fact that he said, I think, so basically what he just explained is his inner feelings is basically these Ethiopians, they're just opportunistic. They don't really care about theology. They don't know much about that. Yeah, that's very much interesting. But I'm waiting for the final bullet point because that one is the funniest one to me.
Conversion of Ethiopia was generally royalty in the upper class, not a mass conversion. And that's why there would have been ongoing evangelization.
So I just want to very quickly address this point. Like, he's saying, oh, the first conversions were generally royalty, upper class. Yeah, that's how conversions work. The upper class were the ones who spoke Greek. Most of Ethiopia didn't, right? So Saint Frumentius and the priests he brought with him would, of course, been would have had an easier time converting those who spoke Greek, because that's the materials available to the population. Like, common sense, you know.
Let me ask a very simple question. In the book of Acts, when St. Paul is trying to convert the Roman Empire, who is St. Luke documenting he's converting? Aquila, Priscilla, Agrippa. Who are these people? These are aristocrats, royalty. These are part of the nobility. So if you want to complain about the conversion of people in upper class in Ethiopia, first take it up with St. Paul, right? Take it up with St. Paul. Thank you. One of the comments literally just said it. Bro's acting like a big reason for Rome's conversion wasn't the conversion of the emperor. Like, what are we talking about? Is this a capitalist critique? I'm confused.
And Craig has experience. I'm pretty sure he's been on missionary trips. He should know this, right? Those who speak English, he'd have an easier time converting. This is common sense. If you share a language with someone, especially a language as widespread as common with available tools and materials, use your brain. Come on now. Let's. Do you want to make another point, or should we continue?
Now I'm just waiting for the last point because that one is
Okay,
just
okay.
the ultimate.
This could be why like Craig copyright striked my video when I shouted out his mission trip, but that's not here or there. You never know.
Oh, I apologize in advance. Let's continue.
For example, the 9 saints, which we'll say the Non Chalcedonian saints, and their evangelism in Ethiopia in the 5th century is not proof of ecclesiastical Non Chalcedonianism, right? We're talking about the integrity of the synod, not whether or not they became philosophically in adherence with Non Chalcedonianism. Because there's no parallel non-Chalcedonian church at that point, right? So that's kind of a relevant point that's brought up a lot. Really makes no difference for.
Okay. Let's pause this really quick.
Now,
all right. So he concedes that the 9 saints are that not only are they non-Chalcedonian, they're Miaphysite, but that they evangelize Ethiopia. Okay. What do we know about Ethiopia so far? They were under Alexandrian jurisdiction. We know from all the historians that they were receiving bishops since the time of St. Athanasius the Apostolic. So you're telling me that Ethiopia had bishops from the time of St. Athanasius from Alexandria. Alexandria is immediately non-Chalcedonian after the schism. So we're getting non-Chalcedonian bishops. And then we venerate 9 different Miaphysite saints, build monasteries in their honor with imperial support from the emperor of the country, and have hymns written in their honor by the leading hymnographer of our country. But no, that's not proof of ecclesiastical non-Chalcedonianism. Can't be. This is a concession. He just gave all of this that he was spouting on Ethiopia that single bullet point gives it all up.
To that point, right? So that's kind of a relevant point that's brought up. It makes no difference for our purposes here.
It's irrelevant, guys.
Now, in the 6th century, under King Caleb, the Ethiopian Christians were in connection with the non-Chalcedonian but Melkite patriarch Timothy III.
First of all, Timothy III was not a Melkite. What the hell is he talking about? What is he talking about? What is he talking about? Timothy III was not a Melkite. I'm at a loss for words. You think he's confused or he's trying to be dishonest or what?
Yeah.
Like the source he referenced. Go ahead.
The source he talks about. Oh, sorry.
I'm gonna go.
Real quick, just because I want to bounce off what Maas was saying. Like the source he talks about literally talks to him as a Monophysite patriarch of Alexandria. So I don't know if this is like an argument from silence for John of Ephesus, and this person is like, oh, where did he even get this thing, right? Because it makes no sense whatsoever. Ethiopia's conversion differed from Nubia. There was never like a Longinus type of mission. So I don't know what he's noting. The 9 saints were not imperially like sent by missionaries. Like if you listen to what Deacon was talking about earlier, there were famous bishops in correspondence with John of Ephesus. They were not subsidized or funded by Empress Theodoria. The 9 saints fled persecution and were welcomed in Ethiopia, where they strengthened the faith of the people, learned the language, built churches, and translated works. So King Caleb did not have a Chalcedonian bishop in Arabia, like Craig is sourcing. But once again, like his own source refutes this. The very vagueness of the Orthodox appointee of Justin to Alexandria, Asterius, or perhaps Proterius seems instead to favor the likelihood of an incumbent in Arabia appointed with Caleb's approval by Timothy III. And from another source, it is certain that the bishop consecrated for the newly conquered South Arabians, not called Genzentius, he did not hail from the Occident, but the Orient, and that he was a Monophysite, not an Orthodox, so-called Orthodox Chalcedonian. This is from Shahid in Byzantium in South Arabia. So there's an excellent thread, shout out to David George on Twitter, defending the orthodoxy of St. Caleb of Axum. And we've literally refuted the only objection you've brought forth, that he tolerated a Chalcedonian bishop in Arabia. Needless to say, he's coping. Like, he has to defend his own saint being a heretic. So he has to make up this stuff. And again, like all of this stuff, I might be reading ahead a little bit, but like again, because I see Chalcedonians constantly saying Caleb of Axum is a Chalcedonian, Caleb Axum is a Chalcedonian. Never happened. So
I wanna respond to this comment. It's not what I did, it's what he realized. This is exactly what happens when you start to realize there's a bunch of holes in your position. You start to patch them by doing fan fiction. There's a big difference between history and fan fiction. When the history is not siding with you, you have to stretch it as much as possible in order to make it fit and work. So it's not like he at night decided dishonesty. What's going to happen with this guy, and what I'm predicting is he's going to keep doing this until it really hits. He's going to reflect, and it's really going to hit how much fan fiction is required to make Chalcedonianism stay afloat. I just wanted to add that.
Pray for him. Pray for him.
I wanted to briefly respond to a question that was asked by one of the people in the comments that said, I thought the king made Ethiopia officially Christian in the 300s. Obviously, later Islam eroded much of the faith. Is that not what happened? So in the 300s, you have Emperor Ezana, who was the emperor of Ethiopia, and he sends one of the people in his cabinet, a man named Frumentius, to go to Alexandria to request that the Alexandrian patriarch send a bishop and send holy orders to Ethiopia. Frumentius ends up being ordained himself by St. Athanasius, who was the pope at the time, and then comes back to Ethiopia. So the king made it, obviously, the imperial religion at the time, but we receive the holy orders as sacraments, right? Apostolic succession from Alexandria. And then in terms of Islam eroding the faith, I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, the faith, it remains with integrity. And you see actually for much of Ethiopia, although there's bouts of persecution, every now and then, the majority is actually Orthodox Christianity, right? So that's pretty much the history.
Right, John of Ephesus does not mention a Syriac or Egyptian non-Chalcedonian connection up to the 580s. But he notes receiving clergy under Justinian during Timothy III. So we have no reason to believe there had been an infusion of void clergy from the Jacobites based on the primary and contemporary sources we have. Wouldn't he, argument for silence, but wouldn't he have noted a Longinus-like mission to Ethiopia? Caleb had a Chalcedonian bishop in Arabia, right? So we know this. So there's no reason why there couldn't be both Chalcedonian, non-Chalcedonian, and specifically canonical bishops being sent to Ethiopia. I don't think it's very convincing Caleb was a scrupulous non-Chalcedonian. He would have just taken whatever bishops his allies gave him.
Pause it here. This reminds me of, you guys know the story of the two women that came to Solomon claiming that the baby was theirs. And the test Solomon had is he said, split the baby into two, right? And so then one woman says, well, no, I'd rather that the other one kept it, keep it alive and intact. The other one says, it's okay, split it into two, right? And we'll each take a half. And Solomon gives the baby to the one that objects to the cutting into two. This is how you know that he himself doesn't really buy that Caleb was Chalcedonian. What does he claim? He says it's not convincing that Caleb was a, quote, scrupulous non-Chalcedonian. Oh, well, maybe let's compromise on there was a mix of non-Chalcedonian and Chalcedonian. So the saint that you venerate was okay with a mix of heresy and orthodoxy? That's the guy you venerate? What does that say about him? How is he a saint in your synaxar? If he's someone that's comfortable with these monophysites, mixing with the Orthodox. That doesn't make sense. That sounds a lot to me like the fake mom in that story that was comfortable with splitting the baby into two. But no, we believe that Caleb was a defender of orthodoxy. That's why he went into Arabia in the first place, to defend his fellow Orthodox Christians in Nagaran. So this guy is always anti-ecumenism when it comes to the contemporaries, but he's okay with his saints being ecumenists. So pick.
Yeah, and the claim that he made here is quote-unquote evidence is that Caleb had a Chalcedonian bishop in Arabia. If you guys know what this is referring to, I believe his name is, or the Chalcedonian sources call him Proterius or something. I don't know. There's lots of disagreement. But we know this is false. We know this is false. We have a source saying it is certain that the bishops consecrated from the newly conquered South Arabians was not called Gregentius. Gregentius was another name that the Chalcedonians called him. That he did not hail from the Occident, but from the Orient, and that he was a Monophysite, not an Orthodox Chalcedonian. And I believe Simple covered this a little bit as well.
Yeah, my bad. I'm
So
trying to get
No
through
problem,
this.
no problem.
Keep everyone
Allegedly, after
awake.
Theodosius was deposed, Abraham, who's the king after Caleb, would not take clergy from Chalcedonians. But our earliest evidence of this is a non-Ethiopian 9th century non-Chalcedonian source.
Did he say Abraham was the successor of Caleb?
He did, yeah.
Is that true?
No.
Yeah, I was thinking, what? So Abraham was the appointed king for him here, correct?
Yes, he was the viceroy, and yeah, when Caleb went to Southern Arabia, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know what he's referencing here.
After Caleb would not take clergy from Chalcedonians. But our earliest evidence of this is a non-Ethiopian 9th century non-Chalcedonian source. So take that for what it's worth. Same source says that the entire native Ethiopian synod died out. So like this actually, if that were to be true, would permit the possibility that they would have took Jacobite infusions because they had no native synod. There's indications that the Gainites tried to enter Ethiopia, but that they were kicked out. So we don't have reason to believe that Gainites would have been part of the clergy in Ethiopia. And we have an Arabic history that indicates, similar to Longinus, Theodoret, so the Jacobite bishop of Ethiopia. But Monroe admits that this is potentially anachronistic and geographically confused. He's thinking of the Longinus mission to Sudan, and he's confusing that with Ethiopia, which is my opinion, by the way. Now, that said, from the 6th century, there's very little information available about either the history of the Aksumite kingdom or its ecclesiastical affairs. Their kingdom collapsed during this era. We lack information of the crucial parallel church era. So, like, that's why we're going to sources centuries.
You lack
don't have enough primary
information on
sources to
every
accept
era. He lacks information on every era, not just this one.
And
You lack all of information on every
yeah, but just to add on to that, his entire argument is one from silence, and you guys will notice he's saying, "Oh, because Ethiopia was quiet between these centuries." I don't even know what he's trying to say, but all I know is that everything is based on silence. Let's continue.
Silence from John of Ephesus, which is not very strong. We have scanty non-Chalcedonian historical sources indicating a dying out like Egypt and the installation of Jacobites. I would just say why I don't believe it is how, without Justinian in Ethiopia, could they make a dying out? Like, there's no impetus for it. Okay, the king collapsed. That doesn't mean like people stopped being Christian instantly in Ethiopia. It might have hurt Christianity in Ethiopia, but there still have been bishops and Christians. So that part just doesn't make sense. I don't think it's realistic that bishop had no resident native bishops. That's my view. I think that native bishops, they always had a canonical synod. Indeed, there are notable gaps.
Okay, but what's the evidence? You know, he's telling us what he thinks. Okay, we get it. But what are you gonna cite anything for us that Ethiopia had a native synod with native bishops? Are you gonna show us?
Yeah. I mean, he even concedes that they don't we never needed their king, like, which is crazy. Like, it's a contradiction because
Sorry.
earlier he says we needed their king for defense, and now he's like, oh well, if the king dies, they don't need the king to still be Christian. Just another concession. Sorry, keep going.
Scholarship admits. Is this proof of scanty documentation or a lack of bishops? We don't know. Probably scanty documentation. There's still so much that's not translated yet in Ge'ez.
Can you pause right
and perhaps it also is because they still.
So this is so strange because this is a Protestant argument. When I was on Ruslan's show, this is the exact argument that he gave against apostolic succession. If you don't have exact documentation in every single century about which bishop went to which bishop, then that means that there was an apostolic gap. And I'll take it further. This is also really an atheist argument too. Because these are the same people that are going to try and show that the scripture is corrupted because if you don't have exact documentation in this and this and this, you set an unrealistic standard, then that means that the scriptures are corrupted as well.
Wait, Moss, in Alexandria, remember what Craig was saying? How they couldn't find what? Evidence of what? Any Chalcedonian patriarchs, right? So doesn't this...
Wikipedia...
Doesn't this completely backfire on him? Sorry, Deacon.
It does.
No, yeah, you're good.
It does, and this is just a reminder that his double standards are always hurting him. Always hurting him.
And I also want to note here. I want to note here also. Again, the burden of proof is going to be on him. If you know that Ethiopia was resolutely Alexandrian in the 4th and 5th century, and you know that in the 6th century Ethiopia was actively venerating Miaphysites and had Miaphysites evangelizing and establishing monasteries across Ethiopia and becoming central spiritual figures, and you see them also reaching out and having relations with other Miaphysites. So you have strong evidence of Miaphysitism in the 4th, 5th, 6th century. Then the burden of proof is not on us to show that that continued. The burden of proof is on you to show that that changed. So saying I think is not going to be enough. I would argue even showing one scholar saying what you're thinking is not enough. He still has not yet to produce a scholar agreeing with him because it's a academic consensus that Ethiopia was resolutely non-Chalcedonian. But even if he did and brought one, that would not be enough to show a burden of proof.
I think the burden of proof is on Craig Ronald McDonald to show that the recipe for chicken McNuggets has been the same this whole time.
Are we? I think we're
needed to evangelize Ethiopia more is another possibility. No. So my view again on Ethiopia. Ethiopian synod was always chaotic, but it had bishops, more chaotic than they dare admit, but it had bishops. By the 7th century, the Ethiopian synod likely had both Chalcedonians and non-Chalcedonians based upon both Chalcedonians and non-Chalcedonians at the periphery of Ethiopia. I mean, we have no written sources, so what else do we base this upon?
Your mind, your imagination, is that what we're basing it upon? Like he's saying, okay, we don't have written sources, so anything goes. So I'll throw my opinion out there. You guys can take it as fact. Who cares? Are we serious? You know, even the title of the slide, it gives you an indication that these arguments are entirely baseless.
Yeah.
There's no state apparatus to oppose matters one way or the other, so we have no reason to believe in a native dying out. I just think that's the wrong geography being opposed by a 9th century history. We do know that Muslims in Egypt played a role in the non-Chalcedonian rise within Ethiopia, and this shows geopolitics. It's a way of trying to get control at the caliphate periphery. We know, for example, that Severus of Ashomin, a Coptic in the 10th century, claimed that Amr sent Benjamin, that 7th century Severian non-Chalcedonian patriarch, to negotiate with Ethiopia. So we know that they're getting some official favor where their official church diplomat is that particular non-Chalcedonian patriarch, not a Gainite, not a Chalcedonian. This implies Muslim recognition of Severians, right? Because it's being used for official state business, not Gainites or Chalcedonians. We have, I hope everyone's having a blessed Lent.
Wait,
you so
can you
much.
pause it really quick? How is this not a concession that we were non-Chalcedonian? Why is the caliphate allowing them to send specifically, quote unquote, Severian bishops to Ethiopia? It's because they understand that Ethiopia already had a connection with them. And this goes perfectly with what I was talking about in the 14th and 15th century, where you have emperors like Emperor Yakunamnak pressing the Muslims in Egypt to send a Coptic bishop to them. So you just conceded. I don't. How is this not a concession? Is something going over my head, Moss? Help me out here.
No, you're absolutely right. He just doesn't realize it.
Chicken McNuggets.
It sounds like
You gotta tell it.
realistic to believe an entire native church died out, especially one truly believes in the promise of Christ that he would not permit his church to be prevailed by the gates of hell. So we'll continue. Amir read Isaac I, and Amir, a different one, read Isaac I. Isaac I was a late 7th century Severian patriarch, diplomatic letter, and sided with Isaac against Melkites to send bishops to Ethiopia and the Nubians. So this implies that the Chalcedonians were trying to send bishops, even when they were cut off from Constantinople. It's not they stopped trying to fulfill the gospel admonishment of Christ to make disciples of every nation. And this implies that they had already sent clergy. It's like, what, is this the first time they ever sent clergy to Ethiopia in the late 7th century?
Okay, very quickly, I took a look at this letter. I read the letter, you know, just to make sure it's saying what he's saying, and it isn't. The letter relayed in the citation not once mentions the Melkites. It's referring to a conflict between the kingdoms of Makuria and Mauritania, or Nubia and Abyssinia, in which both were writing letters to Pope Isaac requesting the ordination of bishops, and both had a quarrel with each other regarding their relationship with the Saracen. Melkites aren't mentioned once in that letter. I don't know, perhaps it's a misquotation or he's being dishonest. You know, I can't really say, but it's total nonsense. Let's continue.
And if they were, for whatever reason, unsuccessful in the 7th century, surely they had to do it in the 6th century if they're trying to do it in the late 7th century, under persecution, that is. We have that the Coptic Patriarch John XI, the 1400s, promised to appoint Metropolitan Ethiopia with the Sultan's permission. So this is consistent history of Muslim meddling through the Coptic Oriental Orthodox Church as a way to get them to somehow have some power over Ethiopia. So it's a sort of program encouraged. I'm not going to say it's like orchestrated entirely. I mean, the Coptic Orthodox had every reason to want to do this too, but it's certainly supported by the Caliphate. So sure.
Yeah, this is
Can I go
yeah,
over
go
this
ahead,
real quick?
go ahead.
He says that Pope John the 11th promised to appoint a metropolitan of Ethiopia with the Sultan's permission. You know why? Because if he didn't, failure was to comply with the Muslim Caliphate is a death sentence, as Al-Kushani says. He I don't know, like, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? We're still waiting.
Yeah,
Like, it's not like he just like sorry, go ahead.
No, throughout history, the sultans have made several, I don't know, sultans, caliphs, whatever, the rulers, they made several attempts to prevent correspondence between Ethiopia and Egypt. I'm sure, Deacon, you know about this, because Ethiopia was a threat. They were a strong military power, and they were willing and ready to free the Coptic people. And so on several occasions, the sultans, the rulers, would prevent the Coptic patriarch from ever writing to or ordaining a bishop to Ethiopia.
This is what I was trying to explain. How this talks about this in church and state. You see this throughout the history of Ethiopia-Egyptian relations, which is Ethiopia has a lot of things. Firstly, it was a superpower at that point, right? Troops, army. That's why Caleb is able to make that expedition in the 6th century, and this continues on, right? Even during the Zagwe, Solomonic dynasty, the different, because you have the Aksumite dynasty, followed by the Zagwe dynasty, then the Solomonic dynasty. They were extremely powerful. That's one. Two, I know this one's a bit of a soft spot, but we also have the Nile. We can dam it up if we want to. And that's a threat that the Ethiopians make multiple times in history. And we make this whenever a bishop is like late in being sent, so the Muslims stop the Alexandrian from sending one. And so we also sometimes make this threat when persecution really increases in Egypt.
Yep.
So sometimes whenever we see that the Muslims are really mistreating the Copts, then we make this threat, right? So this is not like a special thing, right? Like we have this context behind it.
There's a case where, like, back then when Nubia was still Christian, the king of Nubia, when a Coptic patriarch was imprisoned, Nubia went down there and said, unless you release the Coptic Pope, we're going to go to war with you, against the Muslims.
Yeah.
So I don't know where he's getting this stuff from. Like, it really doesn't make sense.
So I have a quick quote here from Al-Kalkashandi, describing one of the Sultan's orders forbidding correspondence between the Coptic Patriarch and the Nubians and Ethiopians. So I'm just going to read it very quickly. If the order is addressed to the Patriarch of the Jacobites, the words, "Let him avoid the sea," should be replaced by the following: "Let him avoid what may cause him trouble, and be aware what may come to him secretly from the side of Al-Habisha. If possible, he should even avoid breathing the breeze of the south. Let him know well that that matter, though apparently safe, is dangerous, and that he should not rely upon the power of," and this is some racist language, "of the blacks or Al-Sudan, because Allah created the sign of the night to be dark and the sign of the day to be bright." Almost as racist as the Chalcedonians. This is a letter from the Sultan. We can continue.
To answer the question, Ethiopian Synod is a mixed bag canonically, right? That's my opinion, but I would say, charitably speaking, it's canonical enough because they, even with infusions of void bishops, they would have had native bishops and other Chalcedonian bishops infused that would have been canonical in origin. Now, let's talk about the demographics in non-Chalcedonian schisms, because this is something that I'm going to issue.
I think we're done here. The rest of this, it's going to be a very quick part 5, hopefully, God willing. Does anyone have any closing remarks or final thoughts on the content we covered so far?
That's okay. Agen, anything after?
I was just going to say, we're going to be able to do part 5 very quickly. Doesn't look like there's any substance left.
Yeah.
Any finishing remarks, guys? So we wrap this up.
I have one quick thing. Part 5, we're going to finish some stuff. We might retitle it instead of part 5. It'll be like we want to go into the history, some of the history of the EO schisms, because as you know, Eastern Orthodoxy isn't a united church as some people try to claim. They've had plenty of schisms. Maybe if anyone has any history related questions, we can open it up for Q&A real quickly. But yeah, there's not much left. So the stream, all of this is over. I also want to mention that we are going to respond to Cleave to Antiquity's insane crusade against Deacon Mehret and the Ethiopians, and claiming that we're all black magician witches or whatever. So that's coming up too.
Everyone watch the Harry Potter movie in support.
Okay, so he just conceded. He's a magician. Okay, do we see this, guys?
Most likely, we're gonna also respond to Ubi Petrus down the line. So I haven't forgot about that either.
There's so much, bro. There's so much. He claims Armenians are Chalcedonians. Where? I don't know.
Caleb of Ethiopia sent Chalcedonian missionaries to Armenia to convert.
Oh, my bad.
After Theodosius, he got formally self-abdicated, and then he emailed Caleb of Axum.
Real quick,
you see, hold on. You guys see this most recent comment? Why haven't the Copts ever risen up against the Muslims? We have. I don't think you realize. Yes, there have been several revolts throughout history. Revolts headed by the Copts and not by the Melkites, by the way, even early on when there still were a population of Melkites. It was the Copts who initiated the first revolts.
Okay. Anything else, guys?
That's it, bro. Pray for us, guys,
comments,
and our sanity.
Okay. Thank you guys for watching. God bless, guys.
Thank you.